Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Logia Luffy, Yami Edition, by Wolvenstrom. A little mix-up in produce results in a traitorous man with a mouth full of rubber, and a happy-go-lucky boy with a darker edge to him. Possibly Luffy/Boa. Big shout out to the warlords of this channel. Native Warrior, Claude Lifrayes, Neo Esker 23, Derek Dowdy, Zazu Zayaz, Abdul Rauf Ali, In3WT, What If Lord, Black Money Young Leon, Garrick Russell, Case Clark, KSGP L4YZ, Brian McKenzie. You know who you are. Want to stand with them? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios.
Once more in a scene that is increasingly overused at the beginning of a new arc, we find the Straw Hats on the ocean, this time sailing towards the Grand Line in a marvelous new ship that by all rights shouldn't be used for more than short island-to-island trips with a crew not even half as big as what other pirates usually enter with. Nami continued to steer her course while Zoro had went to the upper deck to swing his weight-covered practice blade. Usopp and Luffy were being the least useful to the voyage since their duties primarily consisted of drinking and dancing despite only recently being near completely crippled. Through the miraculous power of anime physics, both the idiot captain and the cowardly sniper had managed to heal in a matter of days. For the most part at least. The burst vessels had went past the initial stages and now Luffy resembled a giant walking bruise. Usopp, though he had been wrapped head to toe in foot-thick gauze, was now the least injured with only a thin head wrap and a few bandages were in there. Right now though he was actually taking care of one of the more important duties of being the ship's captain, designing the flag. I know, it doesn't exactly scream hard work when Nami is all but left to running the ship herself, but without a flag you're not a pirate. End of story. You're not allowed to be clever and hide that you're a pirate until you can make your move. If you don't have a Jolly Roger, then no matter how famous or powerful you are, all you're gonna be known as is a sea bandit, like a mountain bandit but on a boat. What's that? A mountain bandit on the sea is a pirate. Do you have a Jolly Roger? No, then you're just a bandit. Finished. Luffy declared loudly while holding up the black painted cloth. What do you think? That you badly need lessons was what they were all thinking. Not all in the same exact words of course, but still. They could see what he had tried to create, they really could. If they squinted and tilted their heads a little, they could just make out a grinning skull wearing what was supposed to be Luffy's hat. Luffy, said Nami, who was trying to think of a nice way to let him down. Your flag looks like crap, Zoro said, saving Nami the trouble. Luffy's brow furrowed in confusion. He looked down on it and eyed it with what would pass for him as critically. Really? What's wrong with it? Do you think it should look angry instead of smiling? Or the hat's brim is too wide? Nah, it's fine. You're just crap at drawing, replied Zoro. Phew, for a second I thought you just didn't like the design. Nami made a note not to bother trying to spare Luffy's feelings. The idiot seemed to bounce back from anything you threw at him. Lucky for you. I, the great and powerful Usopp, just so happened to be a world-famous artist. Right. I don't believe you, so I've taken the task of designing our Jolly Roger on myself. Witness the awe-inspiring symbol of this mighty crew. He unfurled another large black cloth. Wow, they had to admit that it was a really nice flag. Now this showed real promise. From the flag it was clear that Usopp had a steady hand and genuine artistic talent, as well as a serious case of narcissism. Not your symbol, idiot, Nami belted out along with a rap to the back of the liar's head. The end result was a proper, if rather intimidating skull and crossbones hanging from atop the crow's nest and stretched over the sail. You could practically see the extra mass in Usopp's head after doing it. 3 of the 4 pirates collapsed onto the deck, 2 exhausted because of the work involved and the third generally being a lazy person. Bam! Usopp and Nami jolted up at the sound of something heavy hitting the deck, then jumping a mile as they came face to face with the business end of a cannon. Look what I found in the captain's quarters, gang. Luffy. Next time you want us to look at the ship's cannon, don't point it at us. Luffy rubbed his head and looked at his seething shipmates. Don't be like that. This thing's not even loaded, see? Ka-boom! The smell of gunpowder, deafening noise and falling onto the floor when the cannon wheeled backwards from the blast told him otherwise. The cannonball skimmed above the ocean, hitting a small spit of land and blowing it to pieces. Ow! My head. He once again was rubbing the back of his skull gently. Just as the shadows of his two compatriots towered above him, Nami holding her staff and Usopp rolling 3 pellets between his fingers. Ops. The walking bruise looked like a crawling smear for the next while. Seriously, give me one reason why I can't be captain. Nami had several good reasons why she would not name the newest member of the crew as captain, though taking up the mantle herself was becoming increasingly more appealing. All Luffy could do was fight. Sure, he had that whole, deep insight thing going for him, but it only showed in brief flashes after long periods of idiocy, forgetfulness and a tendency not to think things through. For example, his decisions in rounding up crew members were much to be desired. No, the 3 chorused. Why, shouldn't we have some sort of entertainment? We need a cook. What part of that is so hard to understand? Grumbled Zoro while seated in the corner, feeling too cool to sit at the table like a normal person. Yeah. Someone who can tell at a glance what we can and can't eat out on the ocean and how to prepare it safely. A cook is almost if not just as important as a navigator on long voyages. Luffy tilted his head to one side and pouted. So, it's not like none of us can fish. And we can easily buy anything we want at an island. Why can't we get a musician next? It was like talking to a wall. The boy had never came across a food you simply couldn't take a bite out of from the stock or grill and swallow in one bite. He wasn't wary of animals you'd normally call edible suddenly being able to secrete poison or suddenly growing razor-sharp spines because it's a subspecies in another part of the world. Something a cook, especially one working on a ship for a long voyage, must be able to tell instantly. Nor did he know how to turn the preserves you took on voyages because of their long-lasting properties into actual food. Such things were a chef's job. 1. Come out and face me. A deep masculine voice yelled from outside on the deck. Luffy was on his feet in an instant, rushing out the door to see a guy with a canteen taking up his left cheek, waving a thick saber about and wrecking whatever he could see. Hey, who the hell do you think you are, tearing up my ship? Luffy asked angrily. The man sneered, his glare visible even past his kick-ass sunglasses. It doesn't matter who I am. There's no point in telling someone who I'm gonna kill. He charged at Luffy with his blade held over his head to cleave the boy in half. Even a sword novice like Luffy could see the attack coming from a mile away. It was all too easy for him to simply sidestep the sword as it swung down, then bring his fist up casually to deliver a tremendous gut punch to his attacker, making the swordsman cough out a small amount of blood before falling limp on Luffy's outstretched arm. I didn't ask who you are. 'Cause I really don't care. But I won't stand guys like you just jumping onto Mary and trying to wreck it. He tossed the attacker towards the cabin wall, making a loud thud when he hit the timber, followed by sliding down and sitting in a manner similar to the crew's own swordsman. Johnny? Zoro exclaimed at the sight as he stepped out of the cabin. The downed man, despite seconds before being tossed around like a rag doll, was back on his feet in an instant at the sound of the familiar voice. Surprise and relief on his face. Zoro, my brother. Zoro has a brother. The captain of the ship was quite surprised. In the same way Usopp was quite a liar or Nami was quite a thief. Relax, Luffy. It's just a thing that swordsmen have with each other. Zoro explained before turning back to his old friend. He looked around a little first, then asked, nagging at him. Hey, where's Yosaku? Usually you guys are harder to separate than white from rice. Johnny started tearing up, which naturally meant that every hole on his face was starting to run like a freaking river. Brother, it's horrible. Johnny is what? Dying. A new man was sprawled out across the deck like he'd dropped dead there. He wore a long coat, ugly checkered shorts and a black t-shirt that was quite clearly covered in fresh blood stains, as was the symbol-less forehead protector that he wore on his shaved bald head. This came upon him all at once, said Johnny. On minute he was fine, then bam, he collapses. His teeth start falling out like they were held in with old gum, his wounds reopened and he can barely move. He was too sick to be moved, so I shored on that little spit of land over there. That is until you decided to shoot a cannon at us. The mighty Logia user suddenly felt an inch tall until the combined gaze Fighting a powerful urge to hide in his own darkness, he bowed as far as his spine could go. Sorry. You're completely forgiven, Johnny said straightly. Well, that was easy. Nami commented dryly. What was the point in being mad as you forgave that quickly? What's the point in getting angry? My brother's going to die anyway. He brought his arm up to his eyes and rubbed them. My brother and I have been traveling the East Blue for years, picking off the small-time bounties and ending a few reigns of terror before they even really start. Sure, we're not one of the greats, but we've managed to make a name for ourselves. He snorted and bit back his tears. But that's all over now. My brother, and all we accomplished together are gonna die right here. You idiot! The men turned to see Nami march up to Yosaku's downed form, poking and prodding him and lifting his lips to check his mouth like a horse. Nami, Zoro exclaimed. Show some respect for the almost dead, added Usopp. Luffy, she snapped at her captain. Go into the galley with Usopp and juice about a dozen limes, then bring it back here. The two just looked at her in confusion. Go? The second time got the required response. The two raced back up the stairs and into the ship's kitchen, returning about a minute later with a tankard of lime juice which Nami instructed to make the sick man drink. Looks like you're lucky that we shot at you. Otherwise you never would have came aboard and your friend would have soup-bed to scurvy, smirked the navigator, trying not to laugh at the fact that if her captain hadn't almost killed them, one of them would be dead for sure. Scurvy? That sounds familiar, Johnny said, rubbing his chin, trying to remember where he'd heard that before. Nami nodded. It should. Scurvy used to be about as common as sunburn for sailors. You get it if you don't get enough fruits and vegetables in your diet, which used to cause problems since they didn't have proper techniques to preserve them for longer voyages. Nowadays only people going on short trips or the brain-dead travel without any fruit or veg. Would you believe we were doing the first one? No, I would not. Nuts. Luffy was impressed. Wow. So you're a doctor as well. That means I can get my musician all the sooner. Nami looked at him like he was stupid, and since that was the only way she ever looked at him, she also voiced why she was doing so. This isn't doctoring. Practically anyone who ever goes sailing has to know this. Weren't you ever taught that? I think Grandpa may have mentioned something when he sent that wolf pack after me. Or was it when he buried me alive in a fire ant nest? The crew sweat dropped while Luffy casually pondered near-death experiences. Suddenly there was a rustle beneath them. They didn't have time to react before the dying man at their feet jumped up and embraced his friend in a manly hug. I'm completely healed, cheered Yosaku, waving his arm about merrily while giving everyone a big, goofy and completely intact smile, causing the Straw Hats to wonder if he had eaten some sort of healing devil fruit, before collapsing back to the floor unconscious with blood pouring out of his mouth. Nami turned to her shipmates. What did we learn today? Always prepare for long voyages, said Usopp. Don't think that you'll be healed immediately after being cured, guessed Zoro. That I'm so awesome that no matter what I do wrong something good comes out of it, said Luffy. Since Nami was certain that was as good as she would get from the Logia user, she just sighed and said, good enough. Eventually the talk came back to cooking, with Luffy's stubborn refusal to admit that one was more important than anything else at the moment, and his crew deciding just to go get a cook anyway, hoping that he'd be too busy stuffing his face to care. Can't be just anyone either, said Zoro while lazing against the mast. If he's coming aboard this ship, then they can't just cook. They have to be able to at least defend themselves. Johnny, who was busy tending to the still ill Yosaku, perked up at the description. Brother, I know of such a chef. Zoro and the rest turned to him. You do? Johnny nodded. Yeah, but getting him to join might be a real pain. Luffy just grinned in response. So he'll fit right in then. Just tell us where to go. Ya know when he said, inside a big fish, I thought he was kidding, said Usopp, staring at the apparent location of their seafaring cook. It wasn't exactly a fish. It was a fairly large ship with a big fish head for the figurehead and a large fishtail for the rudder. It had two masts which had their masts furled up, and from what the crew could see, several anchors since the boat barely rocked against the waves. They could tell that the ship obviously wasn't built for speed since it was almost completely round and about as dynamic as a brick. I ain't kidding. Johnny huffed. This is Barati, the Barati, as in the famous ocean-going 5-star restaurant? I hear that this place has the best and most exotic food outside of the Grand Line, and you don't even need to book a table since not everyone can get to it, exclaimed the giddy Nami, who after so long of eating only the basics was ready for some civilized cuisine. Suddenly a deafening roar came out of nowhere, rocking the ship's Tim. Ah, the hell with it, the punchline is that it's Luffy's stomach. Mmeeaatt. The Yami boy moaned loudly. Visions of foods the likes of which he'd never tasted filling his vision. Dark wisps began to roll of his as he prepared to port himself over to the ship in a hurry. Zoro sighed and grasped the back of his captain's shirt. We better hurry inside before he freaks out everyone in the restaurant. Yeah right, brother. I remember your face when I told you, he often comes here. Yosaku snidely remarked, coughing a little as he still wasn't 100%. Zoro grinned in a manner usually reserved for men who twirl their facial hair between their fingers, sending a chill up everyone but the hungry captain's spine. Of course that did nothing to match the absolute terror they felt when a massive thunderclap echoed through the air and the ocean just next to Mary exploded, causing the small ship to rock harshly. Nami and Usopp landed on their behinds while Zoro unintentionally let go of Luffy in surprise. Pirate S, surrender or die. A male voice shouted out past the waterspout the explosion made. The crew didn't know whether to be scared or relieved. It was a marine vessel all right. The butt-ugly zebra stripe pattern it had and the word, Marines, in big bold letters painted across the sail left no one wondering that. However, the very fact that they had fired a warning shot instead of blowing them up first showed that the captain of it at least wasn't of the "I'd send a kid to impel down for even playing pirate" kind of marine like a certain hot-headed admiral. Wait. I don't recognize your Jolly Roger, the voice said again, coming from the impeccably dressed man aboard. He was a fairly tall man, not all that surprising since short Marin in the way of intimidation, and reasonably well built, showing he could probably hold his own in a fight if he wasn't afraid of getting his purple and black pinstripe suit ruined. His non-girly pink hair was combed back and part at either side of his rather average and forgettable face. The sort of face where if you were asked for a description you'd answer with, sorta, and, kinda. Except for the scar he had on his right cheek with stitches still fresh in it. On his fists, however, were a pair of unusual knuckle dusters. Instead of the smooth design that flowed with every bump of a finger's joint, 4 screw heads were over each of them, making the new pirates wince at the implications. Well. If you don't just look like a bunch of kids playing pretend of your daddy's boat. The man taunted. I'm Lieutenant Iron Fist, full body of the Marines. And who might you brats be? Are you really pirates or just pretending? Luffy temporarily forgot about his hunger, seeing this as a chance to start making a name for himself. He crossed his arms and yelled proudly. We're the Straw Hat Pirates. We just made our Roger yesterday, but we're the real deal. Oh, full body said, scanning the crew, lingering on Zoro briefly before stopping on Johnny and Yosaku. You two are those low-rank bounty hunters. Jamie and Kosaku or something, right? Jamie narrowed his eyes behind his glasses. That's Johnny and Yosaku. Oh, like it's important. Full body smirked. From the look of it, you two were kidnapped by these no-name rookies. That's kinda sad, because I don't think even the weakest of crews would waste their time recruiting a couple of idiots who've never claimed a bounty past a few million. Johnny said with his hand to his ear. Brother, I think this 2-bit Marine just insulted us, he said in a mocking tone. Yosaku took a drag on his cigarette and nodded, bringing his hand up to take the cigarette and discreetly cough up some blood. Yeah. We can't let some color-blind idiot tarnish our good name. Without a second thought they drew their swords and charged at full body, jumping over Mary's side and directly at the Marine boat. Get ready, you Marine peacock. 2. The fight was over in seconds, and quite surprising to the pirates considering that the Marines they had seen so far had not been all that strong. Of course that was from comparison to themselves, but you get the idea. Without flinching, full body brought his metal-knuckled right fist to block against Johnny's swords, smashing through the blade like plaster and ramming his fist right between the bounty hunter's eyes. His unguarded fist corkscrewed, both deflecting Yosaku's sword away from him and catching him in the solar plexus. The two were dropped like weights. The Marine then picked up the two and with minimal effort flung them back onto Luffy's ship face first. A Marine's rank reflects his power like a bounty reflects a pirate's. You two couldn't make it past Ensign or break a million berry like you are. Know your limits, he sneered. Fool buddy. A female moan came from inside the marine ship cabin just before a door opened and a pair of thin, hairless arms reached out to grasp his. Come on, quit picking on those kids. You know the Bharati doesn't hold tables if we're late. He looked into the cabin and smiled. Fine. He turned back to the Straw Hats. Today's my day off, and this ship isn't made for capturing S like you, so I'll leave for now. But if I see you again out there, you'll be mine. With that, the ship began to sail away. Luffy, Zoro and Usopp stared after the ship while Nami knelt down beside Yosaku to check the damage. Sei found several papers had fell out of the amateur swordsman's jacket. They had a picture, a number and the word, "Wanted," on them. Bounty posters. Nami whispered. Yeah, Sister Nami. The bald man moaned. We carry posters of every bounty in the blue on us at any given time so we know who we can take in. We've only caught some small fries at the moment, but soon we'll have the big fish. Nami stayed deadly quiet, biting her lips while looking at a bounty that had caught her eye. Back on the ship, full body, leaving the cabin he was in and covered in lipstick marks, turned to an ensign keeping an eye on the pirate ship they were leaving. Let's nip this in the bud, okay? Aye, sir. The Marine said and lit the cannon, sending the round shell at them with a loud boom. Full body watched almost in slow motion as the ball went rocketing at the crew. Glad he stopped something that hadn't even started. He was so gonna enjoy this. Or at least that's what he thought until black fire erupted on the ship that he was sure the cannonball didn't cause. Less than a minute ago, Usopp had his share of positive traits. Granted, they were vastly overshadowed by his negative ones, but he still had them. Among these traits was his incredible eyesight, which allowed him to be a hell of a sniper. It was these eyes that were trained on Full Body's boat that allowed him to see the seamen ready the cannon at a distance that others would barely catch. Luffy, they're gonna fire on us. He then followed his first instinct to jump so he would be carried by the explosion to safety. Of course, the cannon hadn't even been fired yet, so instead he just crashed face first beside Johnny. Boom! Just as the cannonball was fired, Luffy jumped onto the bulwark. Black fire erupting from an outstretched arm and swallowing the explosive orb whole, shocking everyone in the vicinity. The bounty hunters and Usopp's jaws were hanging at their knees. Nami turned away and Zoro was more annoyed than anything that he hadn't had the chance to see if he could split it in two before it exploded. Full Body, on the other hand, was more confused. He wasn't close enough to see that Luffy was the source of the oddly black flame and wondered as to what the heck was inside that shell. Luffy grinned as his power swirled to form a black whirlpool in his outstretched hand. Here's your cannonball back. Yami Yami release. He yelled just as the whirlpool bulged slightly and shot something out at the Marines at full speed. Only not a cannonball. It collided with the Marine that had shot the cannon and sent his crashing into the captain's cabin hard enough to make the wood crack. Wide-eyed and trembling, Full Body turned to his subordinate and saw not a cannonball as he instinctively feared, but a tangle of two men, one in white and the other in a striped shirt with what looked like cat ears on his head. Isn't that one of the Black Cat pirates? He wondered aloud just before he fully comprehended what just happened and proceeded to restrain the captive. Back on Mary, Usopp had lifted his jaw back up and was staring after the Marine vessel. A large bead of sweat forming behind him. Luffy. I think you just fired one of the Black Cat crew at them. So that's where they went. He palmed his fist. But then, what happened to the cannonball? Hey, where did Jensen go? Felix, isn't the day? Ka-B-B-O-O-M-M. What are you waiting for? Fire another cannonball now, screamed Full Body at another Marine. But, sir, the Marine stammered, putting two and two together faster than his commanding officer. They returned fire. Whether with cannonballs or captured enemy pirates, it's still QUALIFYS as returning fire. Sir, it's just fine. The angry, confused and scared Lieutenant Full Body loaded up a cannonball himself and quickly ignited it, sending another ball hurtling towards the crew. Again, man, this guy doesn't quit. Another vortex of darkness opened up in Luffy's hand, pulling the explosive in. This time I'm gonna make sure I hit you. I just gotta clean everything out at once. Release. The vortex grew to several times its original size and bulged tremendously, letting out whatever Luffy had stored in his dark space with a force greater than cannon fire. Pirates, animals and plants fired from the darkness like smoking bullets, colliding with the water hard enough for the men to fell like they jumped off a building to met concrete. Others were rockets sky past the horizon that they looked to be flying. Several large trees even hit Full Body's ship, tearing through the planks like they were centuries old, and one even going over the knuckle wearer by a hair's width and ramming into the ship's mast hard enough to snap it in two and making the broken part fall into the ocean. The cannonball was also released and went up in a spectacular fireball as it hit its mark. Luffy was aiming for Baratie, right? You missed by a mile, you dip in percent carat dollar. Guess not. Clunk 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 clunk. The man paced the newly air-conditioned room back and forth, pausing at every full lap he did to glare out at the beautiful sea view, then at the one who caused it before resuming his march. After about 10 minutes of putting Luffy on the spot, the man sat down on the bed in the half-destroyed master bedroom, his peg leg making one last clunk as he did so. "Boy," he said in a voice like he'd rubbed his throat lining with sandpaper, "you mind telling me who you're working for?" "Huh?" was Luffy's intelligent reply, rubbing his eyes. "Who are you working for, you know? Who paid you to kill me so they could get my customers?" "No Woo One." He hiccuped, "Look, I'm sorry for blowing of your foot eye." The aging chef held up his hand. "Relax, it was already like that." He could see the relief in Luffy's eyes at that. "But that doesn't change that you still blew up a part of my restaurant you owe me, and Zeph always gets what he's owed." Zeph was the owner and head chef of the Baratie. If his youth he had a tall and imposing figure, but years had worn away at the tall side a little, leaving him with only the imposing part. The most prominent feature about him besides his absurdly tall chef's hat, his peg leg or the piercing, "Do as I say or I'll peel you like a banana," eyes was his long and heavily braided mustache, shooting out at a 135-degree angle and as straight as a metal bar. It was braided to look like a strong rope. The mustache did nothing to hide the large toothy mirthless grin Zeph was giving the boy right now. "But I don't have any money. I just started pirating the other day." "No money, eh? Not a problem. You can work for me until you make enough to cover the cost of having this hole fixed." "Really? Thanks." Zeph's grin became mirthful. "Great. We need a new waiter and chore boy, so you get the job. With what I give you'll have enough in about a year." "Alright, a week work a year." "No way. Wham? Listen here, you destructive brat. You're in no position to tell me the conditions of how you pay me back," Zeph growled while standing over Luffy, his peg leg digging into Luffy's chest like a blunt spear. "No way." The boy resisted the urge to snap the wooden leg like a twig. Zeph glared at the boy for a second before sighing. He lifted his leg off him and sat back down, much to Luffy's relief. "Alright then. If you won't stay, then I'll offer an instant alternative." "Name it," Luffy said while rubbing his chest. He should have been less quick to take the quick route, he realized when Zeph pulled out a rusty saw from Roger knows where and stared at the boy's legs. "N. Skewer strike. 3. Boom." "Meanwhile." "Ah, now this is more like it," said Full Body, sitting in the comfortable chair, sitting across from a beautiful woman, and would soon be eating the most delicious food in all the seas. It was made all the sweeter by the admiring hushed whispers he of the other patrons. This was how it should be. The waiter was at their table in just a few scant minutes, pouring their wine while balancing their food in his other hand and on his head. Full Body picked up his glass and sniffed it, catching the eye of his date. He took a delicate sip of the wine and swirled it in his mouth gently before swallowing. "Ah, a delicate bouquet from North Mikuo. I'd know that rare taste anywhere. A wine that is dry, full-bodied and slightly acidic such as this could only be at Turatsubolgestein, right waiter?" He lapped up the sounds of amazement at his wine-tasting skills. That is until the waiter decided to be a jackass. "Completely wrong, sir." Full Body almost coughed up the "Ataru something something" at that. "North Mikuo doesn't make red wine, and I don't know what you think full-bodied or dry meant either, but this wine certainly isn't either." The chef smiled without dropping his cigarette. "And I'm the assistant chef Sanji, not a waiter." Sanji was certainly dressed like a waiter. He was tall, thin and dressed in a black double-breasted jacket suit, a blue striped shirt and black tie. He had bright blonde hair combed so that it covered his left eye, probably so he doesn't completely hypnotize customers with both of his spiral-shaped eyebrows. He put down the soup he was balancing in front of the giggling woman and livid marine. The admiration had turned into mocking laughter. He'd been made a laughing stock by this idiot. He'd paid extra to have that bit set up so he could impress his date. How dare this punk do that to him? He took something from his pocket and discreetly dropped it in his food. A gag toy he'd confiscated from one of his men when he thought to play a trick on his commanding officer. "Hey, what's the big idea?" he crowed just as Sanji had turned to leave. "There a problem, sir?" the lieutenant snorted. "You're damn right there is. You mind telling me what a fly is doing in my soup?" Sanji looked down at the offending bowl, seeing a small mayfly floating in the creamy broth. Looks like the backstroke to me." The tittering and whispers turned into full-blown guffaws as the marine was completely made to look the fool. "Now if you'll excuse me, I..." Crashed the offending bowl, along with the hard wood table it was sitting on were broken into pieces when a metal-covered fist came crashing down on it, sending crystal and cutlery everywhere. People stopped their dining and mocking suddenly while chefs ran into the restaurant from the kitchen to see what the commotion was about. "Who the hell do you think you're dealing with?" Full Body snarled, standing up and glaring at the assistant chef. "Waiter. I'm Iron Fist, Full Body of the Marines. Not some run-of-the-mill nobody you think you can mess with." The charming humor drained from Sanji's face. He knelt down at the broken table and looked at the two broken and empty bowls, their former contents spilled and inedible. "If you'd just taken out that rubber fly you put in, you could have eaten the soup," Sanji said flatly, making the whispering at the drama go up that much more. "I'm a customer, you crap waiter," Full Body retorted. "That mean I paid you to treat me like royalty, not a court jester." The chefs watching all paled considerably. Sanji don't. Sanji stood up to his full height, about an inch or so taller than the marine, and glared him down with his single visible eye. "That right? And I suppose you think money gives you the right to act like a D. Messer right?" The screws on Full Body's knuckles began to move, rapidly picking up in speed until a drill-like sound filled the air. The fist blurred at the chef's his with the intent of punching through the back. What followed for the next handful of seconds was a better, more vicious and merciless than anyone in the Bharati could say they had ever seen. No one could tear their eyes away from the scene, even though some had went deathly white and others suddenly found themselves holding their food down. The end result was a pink-haired and purple-suited man now sporting a red face being held by his jaw up in the air by an angry waiter, chef who looked like he was ready for rounds 2 to 300. "The first and only rule of Bharati," he said with no small edge, "don't waste food." If Full Body could, he'd gulp out of fear. This really wasn't his day. He continued to think that when he found himself flying through the air to land on the floor, whacking the back of his head onto the back of a table. "Sanji, what the hell da ya think er doin'?" a stereotypical sailor voice shouted. Patty Cooker was the patty cooker of the boat, in chazzing, frying and baking burger patties as well as steaks and chops. He was the sort of man who you'd expect to eat large quantities of that variety of food as well. A large muscular build in an ill-fitting cook's cloths with bulging forearms disproportionate to the rest of his arms like a certain other nautically known cartoon. His head was shaved right into the wood and a stylish beard surrounding his heavy-lipped mouth. Patty the sailor man grabbed Sanji by the wrist, being careful not to touch the hands, and glared at him. "You idiot! The #1 rule of this establishment is that the customer is king. They're the lifeblood of the business. So why, pray tell, is his lifeblood leaking out of him?" Sanji pulled his arm out of the cook's grip and shrugged. He wasted food. The larger cook gripped the side of his head. "Ah, what the blast is it with you and food? You're gonna get us closed one day, you idiot." "Huff yeah. Like today." Full Body moaned and got up. "I'm gonna make sure that this madhouse is shut down, and this lousy waiter is put away for a long time." "Not if I send you away first," the cook said calmly, earning a horrified look from Full Body and a gasp from everyone else. The other chefs rushed the blonde, grabbing at him every which way to stop their comrade from making a bigger mistake than he'd already made. Boom! All eyes were drawn from the commotion as a new ruckus overtook their hearing. The ceiling caved in and whatever was in the room above came crashing through. From the horribly pained sounds and sailor class cussing, the Bharati staff could guess who it was even before the dust settled. "Get off!" A young voice growled before a man in an absurdly tall hat came flying out of the mess to land on his foot and peg several feet away. A straw-hatted boy pulled himself out of the mess and stood up clutching his chest in clear pain. A small but very noticeable bruise about the size of a coin in the dead center of his chest. Zeph snorted and brushed himself off. "What's the matter, boy? I've hit my eggplant head protege with harder kicks than that." Luffy just glared. He didn't get mad at much, but getting jabbed dead center of the chest by what is basically a blunt spear could make anyone a little upset. "Chef Zeph, a little help," said one of the cooks, restraining Sanji. Zeph's reaction was immediate and no less hostile as his last. His peg lashed out at the teen, catching him where the neck meets the shoulder and sending him to the floor. "Are you trying to make us go under, you eggplant? Well, at least you know how to discipline the help. Not that that's going to make me reconsider shutting you down," chuckled Full Body while pulling himself up. Only to be sent back to the floor by the irate Zeph. "Are you insane? Do you know who I am?" groaned the Marine, trying once more to pick himself up. The head chef snorted. "Yeah. You're the lousy asshole that thinks he can shut me down. Feel free to try. We'll leave a place as the dishwasher boy open for you when you get laughed out of the Marines." Full Body stared at the elder man with wide eyes. This was the place that had everyone singing praises? Were these guys even really cooks? Just as he was thinking about implausibility of the situation, the entrance flung open and a Marine ensign ran in. "Lieutenant Full Body. He's escaped," the ensign declared. "That Krieg pirate we caught a few days ago busted out of the holding cell and beat the whole crew half to ACK." The Marine's chest exploded in a shower of blood when a bullet passed through, causing the man to fall to his knees and to the floor, gasping for life. "You mean, almost, the whole crew half to death? I'm willing to take care of the other half," the holder of the gun stated calmly while walking into the restaurant. The patrons and Marine present pedaled backwards at the sight of him. Even though he was covered in blood and filth, visibly emaciated and panting for every breath, the man still gave of an aura of intimidation, one that said he could kill anyone here. He plopped down at a recently seated and even more recently vacated table and plopped his legs up on it, waving his weapon at the gaggle of chefs. "Hey, a little service over here." Luffy grinned from ear to ear. This guy was just like Zoro when they first met. Zeph was already adding the damages this guy would make to his repairs. Patty, on the other hand. "What'll ye be having, squid face?" the burly armed man said while looming over the pirate while giving a grin that made him look like he ate small children. The other restaurant goers backed up considerably at that statement. The half-dead pirate just grinned, showing his teeth hadn't been bruised in what looks like weeks. "I could care less what it is. Just make sure I get a lot of it in here in the next 30 seconds. Patty's smile only widened. "A lot of it, eh? Well, I'm sure we could arrange something for such a distinguished SBAG such as yourself. All we ask is that ye can pay the bill, sucker." The starving man grinned. Of course. He pressed the gun right against the large man's forehead. "You take lead?" Patty's expression changed slowly, the grin slipping from his face like it had been stuck there with old gum and becoming calm and stoic, looking up at the barrel with indifference. "It is my understanding that sir has no intention of paying?" "Congrats. You're not a total idiot." The gun's hammer clicked. "Now feed me." Patty looked at him for a second before answering, "All right." Wadoom, faster than very few could follow Patty, had brought his fist down on the pirate's head, crushing the chair he was sitting on with him. "Will you take a knuckle sandwich? Can't believe I said that." The cooks, customers and present Marines just entering the room alike were cheering on as Patty lay the smack down on the already near-dead man, except for Full Body, who was taking this opportunity to leave this madhouse as soon as possible. The Barati is for paying customers only, he punctuated each word with a firm kick to the Krieg crewman's midsection. When he was sure that the non-paying lout was thoroughly beaten, he picked him up by the back of his pants and tossed him out the door and onto deck. "Go starve somewhere else," he said before slamming the door behind him to the cheering of everyone in the restaurant. "Dear paying customers," he said politely while curtsying, "the Barati would like ta apologies for the unplanned floor show. Please return ta meals." He was met with more cheering from the grateful guests, much to his ego's pleasure. The only ones not impressed were Luffy, Zeph, who grumbled at the loss of another chair, and Sanji, who simply turned about to head into the kitchen. Luffy watched as he did so and wondered where exactly he was going. Jin, the wolf, lay on the deck struggling to get up. His injuries piled on top of his severe starvation, making it all but impossible for him to move, let alone stand. What's the point? He thought while still trying to get up. I'm hungry, tired, and I'm pretty sure that guy broke something. Why bother? His struggling attempts to get up slowly became weaker and weaker until he finally stopped moving at all. Labored breath, the only sign he was alive. That's when it happened. It washed over him and filled his every sense. Faint sizzling like angel voices. A smell like the shampoo of a lover as you embrace her, and a sight that would make any pirate spit on One Piece. Eat. A voice like God himself echoed from nowhere. He needed no more encouragement. He dived at the plate, automatically grabbing a spoon he somehow knew was there, and started shoveling the risotto into his maw at a pace your mother would clap you one for. So good. He groaned, better than a bilge rat like me deserves. How he managed to get that out without taking seconds to breath between bites is something Sanji would never know. You like it? It's squid risotto. Not the most popular thing on the menu, but we always have some made just in case. Thank you. Jin cried. You have no idea what this means. A decatching pirate captain grinned. I do. He laughed loudly, drawing the attention of the two men below. It means I found my cook. Your cook? Sanji repeated. Luffy nodded and jumped down to meet them. Yeah, I need a cook on my pirate crew, and after seeing this I decided that you're it, he said, pointing at Sanji. A pirate? Wait, so you're the guy that shot at the ship? Sanji snapped. Luffy at least had the decency to look embarrassed. Didn't mean to. I was just firing back after that marine shoot at me and I couldn't control the direction of my shot. Sanji lit a cigarette and popped it in his mouth. You had to practice with all weapons, even cannons. Yeah, cannons. Well, listen good. Just don't think that 'cause you're a pirate that you can act like you own the place. Zeph used to be a heck of a pirate himself before he lost his foot. I can believe it, muttered the boy, rubbing the bruise on his chest still. Not surprising. Most think that first time they met him, although they think he couldn't have been much since he opened this place. But trust me, the guys who work here are worse than any pirate crew. Have to be if they want to survive, guys like you too, the cook said, looking at both men. Unfortunately, we go through waiters and cleaners like a marine does through ass polish. The last guys only latest about a week before they jumped ship with a passenger ship. Zeph got tired of looking and told me I was in charge of customers now. He said, rubbing his own chest a little, showing Zeph didn't have many variations in his persuasion methods. Also, that's why he wants me to stay, Luffy said while moving closer towards Sanji. Well, if you don't want to be a waiter here, then how's about you become a cook on my ship and we get out of here? Sanji took and dragged and shook his head. Can't. Got a good reason to stay. No. Jin and Sanji were knocked back a little by the sheer force behind the shout. Rubbing his non-covered ears, Sanji narrowed his eye at the pirate. What do you mean no? You can't ignore my decision. Can too, Luffy replied childishly. I've decided you're joining my crew and nothing's going to change that. Even if I had to drag onto my ship kicking and screaming and tie you to a pole in the kitchen. What? You can't be serious. The look in the new chore boy's eyes told his otherwise, so he tried a different and more diplomatic approach. You can't drag me onto your ship if your arms are broken, crap pirate, the blonde growled, standing and putting his hands in his pockets. Ha, the joke's on you. If you break my arms, then I can't do any chores, Luffy grinned, rubbing his shoulder, preparing for a brawl. Jin butted in. What? The two soon-to-be combatants yelled at the one who would dare interrupt. Well, name's Jin, by the way. I was just wondering something. What exactly are you after? Rookies in this part of the world don't really do much till they're a few years older than you. Luffy lowered his clenched fists and smiled. Well, that's a dumb question. I'm after what every other pirate in the world wants. Jin's eyes widened. You don't mean? Luffy nodded. Yup, One Piece. BB, but that's thought to be hidden in the Grand Line. You don't seriously want to go there? Go there, huh? I'm not just gonna go there. I'm gonna conquer it and be Pirate King. Jin could do nothing but gap at the boy with the audacity to say something like that. Of course. Luffy said somewhat shyly, I don't really have a big crew yet. I'm just trying to get a skeleton crew ready, then I'll find more when I'm there. He pointed at Sanji. With Sanji here I'll have 5 people in all including me. Hey, don't include me, chore boy. Don't go. Luffy and his unwilling cook turned to face Jin before another argument started up. A skeleton crew? Seriously? Kid, you're just starting out and seem nice enough, so I'll give you a word of warning. If you go to the Grand Line you'll die. Stay here and give up one piece. Luffy, if he'd been told that any other way, would have laughed in Jin's face, but the way he spoke just now, as if whatever life Sanji's food had given him was drained away and leaving his tone hollow and tired. The Grand Line really scares you, doesn't it? Jin shook his head and put his hands on his temples. More than anything else. We thought it would be a walk down the beach. But that Devil's Sea. It was something the likes no one could ever be prepared for. Sanji resisted the urge to roll his eye. Wow, for a Krieg pirate you're such a wimp. Luffy spoke up. Something bothering him. What's a Krieg? Both pirate and cook looked at Luffy like he was stupid. What? No pirates ever came near where I lived and only the mayor got the paper delivered. Fore. Luffy. Said Sanji. The Krieg Pirates is the biggest and most feared pirate crew in the East Blue. All run by a guy named Don Krieg. The crew is 50 ships and 5,000 pirates big. The boy whistled. That's a lot of pirates. Must have all been wimps. Jin lifted his head back out of his hands. Wimps? He said with some annoyance at having that word thrown at him repeatedly. When you have that many guys and run out of the Grand Line when most pirates only have 1 or even 2 ships, it tells me that you were trying to make up for weakness with numbers. Jin could feel the nails Luffy was hitting going right through him. Sanji hummed in contemplation, still that many pirates should still be a force to be reckoned with. Luffy shook his head. If you were dealing with low-ranked marines and pirates in any other blue, maybe. But the Grand Line has a ton of other dangers where numbers mean nothing. It wouldn't matter if you had 100 men or 1,000,000. If you go in expecting the line to be like any other ocean, then you may as well sail into a typhoon and save yourself time. Sanji was impressed. For a newbie you sound like you've been there before. Nah. I just know a guy. The chore boy grinned. Jin had kept quiet while the two boys exchanged pleasantries, all the while going over everything the boy had said, and for the life of him he couldn't argue with any of it. The Don was quite basic in his recruitment methods. Go to the biggest, dingiest, most rat-infested s-holes they could find and start recruiting till the ships were full. Never asking for background, skill level or even name before passing out the dime a dozen flintlocks and cutlasses. For all Jin knew, the entire 5,000-strong crew were made up of 5,000 drunkards who thought it would be a laugh to be pirates. He'd have to talk to the Don about this. His stomach no longer as twisted in knots, he felt like it was time for him to get back to said man. He stood up, wincing as the pain from his recent pummeling, and started to make his way over to one of the ship's lifeboats. You heading back to your crew? Asked Luffy. Jin didn't bother responding and just unfurled the sails. Chef. Yeah? He turned to face the blonde and smirked. Thanks for the food. I'd hate to be you when those nut jobs inside find out what you did. Sanji threw the plate and cutlery over the side in response. Did what? Jin just shook his head and kicked the Barati's side, sending the ship forward before the wind caught the sails. He turned back and bowed deeply to his savior, his head right against the deck of the boat, not uttering a single word. Sanji turned away in embarrassment. Luffy unsurprisingly grinned his almost perpetual grin. After a few minutes without it dropping, Sanji was curious enough to ask why he was smiling like that. Just wondering how you're gonna explain one of the ship's lifeboats being stolen by a pirate. Sanji stared at his for a second. FK. Yeah, Sanji. Zeph's voice rang out from the upper deck. How are y'all gonna explain that? Double FK. Maybe he could stay for a year. Being a chore boy didn't seem to be anything all that difficult. He just came in, introduced himself to the kitchen staff and sat down on a conveniently placed chair. Never once bothering to ask if there was anything he could do while the men and women ran about, leer heads cut off. That is until one chef nearly ran into the seated boy while holding a recently decapitated bird. You lazy ass. The unshaven and sunglasses wearing man growled. If you don't know what to do, then go wash the dishes. He pointed over to a loaded sink. If you say so, said the boy calmly and proceeded to wash the fine china. With that settled, the chefs went back to their duties. one of which was apparently bad-mouthing Sanji while Luffy listened in. "I don't know why Zeph doesn't just kick that idiot off the ship," Patty complained while flipping a recently filleted fish in a pan. "Kazi was the first guy here aside from Zeph man," responded the cook next to him. "So what? He's the one that made all the waiters jump boat, starts more fights than any customer and treats all us like bad tuna." A murmur of agreement went round the room. "I tell y'all if I had me way. Anyone else hear that?" The clear and distinct sound of things breaking echoed around the kitchen. The cook's head swiveled around looking for the source, before falling on Luffy at the sink. The boy was staring back at them with large unblinking eyes, all the while his hands fumbled about under the water where loud cracks emerged from every few seconds. "How many dishes have you broken?" Patty said in shock. Luffy shrugged. "Dunno. Probably not a good idea for me to do something this delicate being as strong as I am and all." Patty raised a fist over Luffy's head only for Carne, Sunglasses Cook, to grab it. "Easy, Patty. Remember you broke your share when you first started." Calming down some, Patty slowly face-palmed and pointed over to the appliances. "Just clean the metalware." Luffy did as complied, but not before snatching some food from a tray and devouring it in a single bite. "Ah, that took 8 hours to cook," screamed a cook in dismay. 5. Luffy smacked his lips a little before moving towards the metal utensils. "Needs salt." The cook cried at the loss of something he had taken all day to prepare. Luffy took hold of a wet cloth and stood over a very large wok. "Okay, I don't think I can break this," he said before going to scrub it. "Wait, that's Yao? Zine GG, asterisk thud, asterisk." The guests at the table near their kitchen were jolted from their seats when the timber and plaster suddenly erupted from the wall and part of a large metal disc appeared where it had been, cutting the strings that had held a large heavy painting of a very beautiful woman in a southern dress on top of a stiff-lipped 63-year-old who had nothing better to do than belittle her great niece's choice in men. The entire staff stared at the wok firmly embedded in the wall with eyes as wide as dinner plates. Patty had sunk to the floor below the wok, which had been centimeters from doing to him what he'd done to that monkey a few months ago to make soup. "BGH. Jing Yabel. Buka Berg. BTVT." Gibberish spouted from his mouth in shock and rage like a 2-year-old on a sugar high. Slowly and robotically rising from the floor and walking towards Luffy, who was busy running his burnt fingers under a cold tap. The chefs watched as Luffy turned around smiling at Patty, who was gritting his teeth hard enough to crack and bringing his shaking hands up towards the pirate's throat. "Sorry about that," Luffy said. Patty stood there for a few seconds, his hands still level with Luffy's neck. The cooks watching with bated breath. A few more moments and one of Patty's trembling hands reached into his front pocket and pulled out a small notepad and pencil. He stuffed them in his would-be murderer's hands, then pointed at the door leading to the restaurant. He looked back up at Patty for help. "Go. Take orders," he growled out. "Come again. Go. Out. There. And take orders, before I kill you." "Ah. Okay," she said cheerfully and left for the main floor. The other cooks remained still with Patty still staring at where Luffy had been. Carne slowly made his way over to his friend. "Up, Patty?" Bam! The pan Carne quickly picked up was caved in by spinach-powered giant forearms. Patty suddenly remembered he had to breath and took several deep gulps of air. "Better?" Carne asked. Patty took in a few more breaths and nodded, heading back to his station and resuming his work, only to stop a few seconds later. "What are you looking at? Get back to work." The kitchen was suddenly abuzz from activity as the cooks resumed what they did best. The straw-hatted boy, not as oblivious to the anger, grumbled at how his first day of work had been going while scanning the room for people ready to order. "If I wanted to be threatened to be strangled, I'd have stayed home." As he was mulling over his treatment, he spotted yet another great injustice. His crew, picking at plates that were minutes before filled with mouth-watering food and rubbing their satisfied stomachs while sighing contentedly. This was another of the few ways to get Monkey D. Luffy truly angry. If you could eat and he couldn't. "What the hell?" he snarled through his teeth. "I'm slaving away and you guys are sitting about eating. How unfair is this?" Zoro took the toothpick he was using out of his mouth and smirked at his captain's anger. "Hey, we're not the ones who tried to blow up this place. That was an accident. Nami replied, and your point is what? GGGRRRR. Hey leave the poor guy alone. He has to work here for a whole year and he doesn't need us rubbing it in, said Usopp. That lightened Luffy's mood considerably, until his sniper opened his mouth again. On a completely unrelated note, can I change our pirate flag? You know, just until you're out of debt. Sanji meanwhile was pouring wine for a girl he was quickly turning into putty when a loud shout re-solidified his efforts much to his chagrin. Damn it. Excuse me madam, I'll go take care of that noise, he said politely, making the woman blush slightly and him to dance a pervy jig in his head. He walked over to the table. He liked the kid well enough, but if he stopped him getting any then he must be destroyed. He slinked up behind the younger boy and lifted his leg high over his head and froze. Her hair moved like fiery red silk as she turned to face him. Her eyes deeper than the deepest seas, skin like the finest china and lips that begged him closer. She was a goddess. His legs, powerful enough to crush rock, turned to jelly and bring him to his knees. His jaw went slack at the sight of her and he could not tear his eye away from the world she now filled. With titanic effort he put his hands on the floor and tried to push himself up. His palms numb and his legs feeble, he slowly rose. His power returning like the tide, surging through him to reach higher and higher until... Thank Neptune. I owe him so much to allow me to meet you on this glorious day. The Straw Hats looked at him oddly until he shoved Luffy out of the way so he could get down on one knee in front of Nami, clasping her dainty hand in his uncalloused ones and gazing up at her in doe-eyed affection. O merciful goddess! Why must you be so cruel, to bring me a vision such as you yet only allow us together if I were to become a dastard? Tears formed in his eye at the impossible choice. So become a pirate, you eggplant, Zeph said, appearing from the stairs leading to the upper quarters. What was that crap, chef? Snapped Sanji, suddenly on his feet and glaring at his mentor. What your hair cover you ears to? I said beat it, nobody wants you here anymore, Zeph said gruffly. At the same time as this was going on, Jin the not-so-hungry wolf had managed to reach his destination in a far shorter time than first thought. Arriving at a pretty uninteresting island, sailing into an inlet where a not-so-uninteresting ship was anchored. He made his way up to the deck, walking over the bodies of groaning and pleading men to reach the captain's cabin. The door creaked open and promptly fell of its hinges after a few inches of movement, turning to splinters upon hitting the floor. Jin? A deep and coarse voice said. We had a violent coughing? Why yes, Don Krieg, it's me, he said and walked inside. You look well. That means cough you found food. He nodded and then did something that he was here after regret. You'll take me to hack where you got it. It wasn't a request. He stood still for a few moments, then nodded. What the hell are you talking about, old man? Sanji asked, his brow twisting into an even greater spiral of irritation. You heard me, Sanji. Leave, get lost, beat it. Go be a pirate or marine or whatever, just as long as you leave and never come back, the old chef replied. Don't talk crap, I'm the sous chef of this place. The only one that's been here longer than me is you. And that's a matter of seconds, so why would I leave? Zeph stroked his beard in mock concentration. Oh, I don't know. How about you pick a fight with anyone that doesn't lick their plate clean? Do you turn into a chain-smoking puddle of goo whenever you see a pretty girl and see you're a lousy cook? Sanji bit through his cigarette at the mention of sea. Besides, you're despised by every other person who lives on this boat, so does all a big favor and leave. Never. Sanji shouted once more, drawing the whole restaurant's attention. No matter how many times you tell me to or how many of those asses hate me, I'll never leave the Bharati. Coup de mat. 6. Zeph must build his furniture out of scrap wood or something. How else could he afford to replace the tables he'd lost today, including the one he just broke by suplexing his apprentice through it? Little brat. Zeph snorted and headed back to work. You can throw me around till you're blue in the face, crap chef. Because I plan to become the next head chef when you die. The old man didn't even turn around. Then you better pray you're part giant, cause I won't be dying for another 100 years. Sanji stared after his mentor as he headed back to the kitchen, trying to turn the old man into cinders with his mind when a hand patted his back hard enough to make him cough up his stomach content. You hear that? He said you can come with us now. Luffy was quite delighted by this development. Sanji wisely ignored Luffy and rounded back on Nami. His eyebrow twisted into a heart shape with her dazzling smile. "My apologies for the ruckus, madam. Please accept this complimentary fruit cocktail and wine along with my humblest apologies," he said sweetly while pulling a large glass filled with fruit and jelly out from behind his back like in an old cartoon along with a bottle of old wine. Nami was naturally delighted. The most recent member to the crew, however, was less so. "Hey, what about us? That little bust-up was just as annoying for us as her, so where's our complimentary stuff?" A dirty cup full of what he hoped was tea banged down in front of him, making more than half of its contents spill onto the saucer. "There's some tea on the house. That better, you whiny little asshole," said Sanji, who hated having to tear his sight away from the ginger-haired goddess to deal with Needle Nose. "No, as a matter of fact it isn't." Usopp stood up. "The food might be great, but the service stinks like Luffy before bath night." The chore boy shivered. "I mean, look, you haven't even cleared our plates away after we finished like 10 minutes ago." Sanji looked over the offending dishes. Usopp still had some mushrooms left. Zoro had a few stray noodles and Nami had an emptied bean pod left. "You still have food on these plates." Usopp gaped. "Are you serious? That old guy wasn't kidding when he said you make everyone lick their plates clean? Wasting food is a crime. Eat it," the cook said in all seriousness. "I hate mushrooms. The last time I ate some it turned out to be poison and I ended up in bed for a week with my face swollen up like a watermelon. I don't care if it made your nuts drop. They aren't poison, so eat the damn mushrooms." He pressed closer until he was face to nose with Usopp. "Will you two stop fighting? I can't enjoy this with all this yelling." Nami butted in with a mouthful of fruit. "Of course, madam." All of Sanji's aggression vanished in an instant. Usopp and Zoro rolled their eyes while Luffy picked at whatever his crew had left. Nami smiled suggestively, wickedly, and wrapped her arms around the chef's neck and pulled him into a hug. You could see the steam waft out of the cook's ears. The face he made was like if Taru Moriboshi, Hapose and Jiraiya were thrown in a blender, cooked, poured into a mold and shaped into a mask to place on the blonde's face. "By the way," she purred, "this food is a little pricey for me. I was just wondering." "It's all on the house," he blurted out. "Your male friends can pick up the extra cost." Even Zoro cracked the glass he was holding. Nami seemed to think it a good deal though and agreed. "Wow, even I think that's too much," said Luffy while drinking Usopp's tea. "And this stuff tastes dishwater." "Whack, and who told you that you could sit with the customer's chore boy?" the person attached to the foot in the back of Luffy's skull said, grabbing him by the back of the shirt and dragging him back to the kitchen. "Hey, no fair, my break just started." He whined all the way until the thick doors blocked all sounds he made, letting diners, finally, enjoy a moment's peace. A moment's peace. That moment lasted 2 days. 2 days on whining and dining for the crew. Luffy did manage to get better at his supposed duties after realizing that he couldn't get fired simply for being bad at his job. The same as anywhere else at the moment, really. He stopped cracking and Patty only semi-feared for his life after the first day. While Nami enjoyed the blonde's charity, Usopp and Zoro had taken to staying on the ship and eating what food they had to save money. Luffy was watched closely to make sure he didn't run away, but they didn't have to worry since he seemed dead set on getting Sanji to be his cook and refused to leave until it was so. For the customers it was certainly a fresh change of pace. Regulars were both relieved and disappointed that there was no floor show to go with their meals, but knew that such times couldn't last for long on the Bharati, and those times ended when one man, while sipping on a South Blue blend, dropped his glass when he looked out the window and saw a raised Jolly Roger. Krieg! The Krieg pirates are here!" The restaurant erupted into chaos. Even diners who were used to the constant fighting of pirates and cooks were running around in terror at the thought of facing the King of the East. Carne looked both horrified and a touch cocky while his bald-by-choice friend was gripping his peach fuzz head of hair. "See, Patty? Weren't you told not to mess with a Krieg pirate? Now they're coming to avenge his treatment here and it's all your fault. How was I supposed to know that a crew of 5,000 would care about one guy? We're all gonna die. Waiter, I want a last meal. Shove off, I ain't spending my last hour serving nobody." While the supposedly fearless fighting cooks ran around the ship, others were not nearly so terrified. Zeph, Zoro, Luffy and Sanji were more curious than anything else. namely as to how the massive boat could still be afloat. The flagship of the Great Krieg pirate armada had definitely seen better days. Not a sail on either of its 2 remaining masts were left undamaged. The figurehead looked as if someone had ripped a hunk of it off like a child ripping a hunk of fudge from a big block. 7. The bow looked ready to break away from the stern, and the air was so filled with moans and creaks from both the ship and its occupants that it was hard to tell who was doing which. This ship was on its last legs. "I don't think that was anything done by any pirate," said Sanji. "That sort of damage is the kind you get caught in the mother of all storms." Luffy nodded, cracking his fists on reflex. The panic inside slowly quieted down when everyone started to hear the same thing. A noise that, although quiet, still roared over every scream of terror and crash of Fern MP**. Thump. It drew closer and closer to the front doors. Guests backed away while cooks reached into their cloths. Thump thump thump. Creak. The front door opened slowly and with a pronounced whine from the door, revealing one tall figure in the doorway. It walked in slowly, panting with every step until in clear view of everyone. A woman screamed. Or Usopp. Hard to tell really. Don Krieg was a tall man. Easily a head or more than Sanji or Jin, who was holding him up, and more than 3 times as wide. He was the sort of man you could tell was physically strong, the way his muscles still showed even if he looked no better than his crew member when he first came, and was wearing a heavy fur coat over a tacky leopard print shirt. Sweat and blood ran down his bandaged head, with a lot of it sticking in his Victorian-style sideburns and the rest dripping onto the thick golden chain tying his coat together. "Please, food," he moaned out while Jin inched him further into the restaurant. "I've got money, lots of money." He then collapsed. Jin, who was unable to hold him captain's weight with his own atrophied body, buckled and let the man collapse to the floor. Looks of fear melted in the wake of such a well-known pirate tumbling like that, widening and widening when Jin dropped to his knees and begged his captain to get up. "Please, help him," Jin pleaded to the crowd. "He hasn't eaten in over a week. He'll die if he doesn't get some food." A loud and boisterous laugh rang through Bharati, coming from Patty. Like any good laugh, it spread like a virus. The laughing grew louder and louder until almost everyone in the restaurant was holding their sides and gasping for air. "This is it. This is the great Don Krieg, the most feared man in all the East Blue? Oh mercy me, I'm shaken in me boots, ha 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 ha." "Hey, we're customers, so give us food," said Jin angrily while holding an arm defensively over his captain. "Shut it," snarled the strong-armed cook. He kicked the pirate off his commander. "Like I'm stupid enough to give Krieg anything. I say we leave him to the Marines. Yeah, if we feed him, hell, just rob us blind and take our ship. He won't even get a sip of water from us." Patty closed his eyes and lapped up the attention and praise. It was so hard to come by in a place where you were the closest thing to a thanks he got was someone not backing away from him in disgust. An insistent tugging at his pants leg led him to peer down, and almost wet himself at the sight. Krieg had managed, even in his near-dead state, to raise himself up off the floor, but only enough to pull himself into a bow with his head still firmly pressed to the floor. "Please, I have countless millions on my ship. I'll give you every last berry for anything to eat. Even if it's just a breadcrumb, I'll surrender everything to you. Please." Jin wiped away his tears, more disillusioned than humiliated to see his leader reduced to begging for food like an old tramp. Patty just kicked the man off him. "I don't care if ye were offering a whole island, you're getting nothing." "Hey Patty, could you move?" Sanji asked politely. "Huh? Oh sure." The fry cook moved out of the way on reflex in the face of manners, allowing his hated frenemy past him. Sanji moved around Patty and put a steaming plate of rice in front of the pirate and a bottle of wine. Krieg jumped on it and began inhaling. "Sanji, what the hell do you think you're doing?" screamed one of the chefs. The rest, as well as the customers, freezing in horror at the sight of Krieg scarfing down as much as he could in as little time as possible. One particularly spineless man even ran for the doors and jumped overboard. "What does it look like I'm doing? My job," replied the blonde like it was obvious, which it really was. Carne snorted. "It's not, he'll leave like he promised you, idiot. That man got so strong 'cause he wrote the book on how to be a lying bastard. I know. Killed his old Marine unit and stole the ship to become a pirate. He lied and cheated all of the East Blue until he was the man he is today. He looked down at the man eating like a dog. And he'll probably try to rob and kill everyone here when he's done choking. He was pragmatic to say the least. That's why when Krieg clotheslined him immediately after he finished speaking, there was no surprise in his expression. Pain definitely, and shock at nearly swallowing his cigarette in reflex, but no surprise. Unlike everyone else who actually were surprised what had happened. It would be several days later when Jin would realize this and a cold chill would run up his spine. However, today he was still quite weak and slow thinking from hunger, so wasn't as aware of irony as he should be. So, "Captain, what are you doing? This is the man who saved you, saved me. How ca. Grew?" Krieg's ham-sized hand clamped over Jin's throat in an extremely impatient way of telling him to be quiet. "Jin," Luffy yelled out. "Gratitude isn't something I'm widely known for, Jin," the revived pirate said before tossing Jin to land next to Sanji several feet away. His eyes scanned the room critically, like one would a new home or car. Taking in the people aboard, guests and staff alike, as well as the decor. "I have to say you've got a nice boat here. Or should that be, I've got a nice boat here," he said casually, letting the mere words do all the work. They did the job indeed. Guests ran screaming for the boats they rode in on, hoping to get away with their lives. Bang! A bullet sailed through the hand of the first man to touch a door, courtesy of a pistol in Krieg's hands. "When I claim something, I don't just claim it, I claim everything and everyone in it," he sneered. With a flick of his wrist, a pistol appeared in his other hand as well, pointing towards the other half of the room. His eyes darting around for even the smallest hint of defiance. "Normally I wouldn't even consider such a tiny boat worthy to be my ship. But if any of you looked out the window, you'll see that my old ship isn't exactly up to standards. Neither is my crew, for that matter." Several people gulped loudly. Surely this madman wasn't considering what they thought he was. "But I can't really be fussy right now," he sneered, "so here's what's going to happen. I take the ship, the valuables, and any man strong enough to swing a sword becomes part of my crew for the rest of their lives," he said coolly. One man forgot his fear long enough to be appalled by that statement. "You're insane." "I'm not." "Insolence." Bang! He went sailing back several feet, blood seeping into his white shirt. "Maybe I didn't make myself clear. I never asked. Everything I say is a demand. You'll do what I say, when I say, because I say. Understand?" Jin took a step back from his captain. He'd seen firsthand what Krieg did to those who didn't obey. "Now, as my new crew, I'm assigning you the task of getting food to all my other men on my former flagship. I have 100 mouths to feed, and I don't intend for them to wait a second longer." "No." The crowd parted around Carne like a yellow-bellied Red Sea. Krieg's eyes bulged in anger and he aimed one of his pistols at the cook. "You dare defy me, cook?" Carne sneered right back at him. "Hell yeah, I do. We feed them, and suddenly we're staring down 100 pirates. You may be the king of the East, Krieg, but you're still just one man with a few pistols." Krieg's angry expression intensified for a second before dropping. He chuckled a little. "Maybe. But the question isn't how many I kill, but who I kill." He aimed his right pistol at a young woman holding onto a man who had came here to propose to her. His other weapon aimed into the gaggle of men in kitchen uniforms. "Is anyone here that big a hero?" Surprisingly, no one wanted to step forward. Well, except Luffy, who was struggling in vain as he was kept hidden behind the cooks and guests. Usopp covering his loud mouth shut, while a dozen men plus Zoro weakly managed to keep him from starting a massacre. Jin moaned from his downed position while Sanji shifted the eye. "I'm sorry. I never thought he'd do something like this when his life was on the line." "Ah!" he yelled in pain from a kick to the side from Patty. "That's what you get, fair underestimating captain's scruples. And where do you think you're going, mister? Let's feed double-cross Krieg." The burly man barked at Sanji, who was heading towards the kitchen. The cook turned back to look at Patty. He gazed up at the sign over the door which said, "Kitchen. Staff only," in bold italics, then back at Patty. "The bathroom." Veins bulged all across Patty's scalp, making more than a few people turn away to keep down their lunch. "Don't give me that hogwash. What possible reason do you have to go into the kitchen now? Get the food ready for Krieg's crew." "Duh," gasp. Click 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 click, CLI. Tap tap thud. "Come on, work, you stupid." "Ah, there we go, click. Click click." Sanji took another deep breath of nicotine. His progression to the kitchen halted with the sudden appearance of a number of rather old and ill-kept flintlock pistols being pointed at his head. The cooks holding the guns ranging from clearly unwilling to fire since holding the pistol with both hands couldn't hold it steady, to very eager to put a bullet through his skull and look damn good doing based on the cocky way the one in front of him was putting a hand on his hip, and looking away. "Krieg's pet, are we, Sanji?" said the one with his hand on his hip, slowly rotating the pistol 90 degrees to the left. "We knew you were trouble right from the start. We won't let you take a step near the kitchen to help us like him. And who the FK gave you the authority to decide who you could cook for?" Everyone was at the very least surprised at the blonde Cyclops' blood question. Even Luffy had stopped struggling against everyone, much to their exhausted relief, to watch the interesting development. The cooks did not lower their arms while Sanji explained himself. "We're not pirates. We're not marines. We're not government, police or any kind of people whose job it is to choose what's right and what's wrong. We're cooks, nothing more and nothing less. And as cooks it's our duty to do one thing and one thing only: feed people." The Straw Hats listened intently, as did the rest of the Baratie. "Sure, I know what Krieg's crew is gonna do when they get their strength back, but as a cook I will never deny food to somebody who asks for it. No matter who that person may be. What exactly is wrong with that?" A hammer blow to the back of the head told Sanji exactly what Patty thought of his moving little speech. "Tie this low life up," he commanded his fellow crew members, thoroughly disgusted with the younger Mont's actions. "There's a difference between not caring 'bout right and wrong and bein' royally stupid. I didn't make a fuss the last 50 times ya feed penniless bums, but this time we've gone too far." From out of hammer space Patty pulled out a giant metal prawn. "Couldn't make that up if I was Yoshio Bloody Sawai, 8. And aimed it at Krieg, who, keep in mind, was still holding 2 loaded guns with one actually pointing at Patty yet had not fired, and all the time it had taken the cook to pull out a weapon and heft it in his direction. "Ye want food, Krieg? Then choke on this. Can't believe I said that, Ebi Akahiyaki 9. The squint-eyed man barely recoiled from the incredible force of the cannon fire. Smoke billowed out of his weapon and an explosive sphere colored like its namesake hurtled towards the pirate admiral, who while looking confident was really just as shocked by the ridiculous weapon to even realize what was happening until his form went up in fire and smoke. The explosion sent him hurtling back into the heavy doors, which, since they didn't open the way, they were torn of their hinges to let the flaming mass past. "Boss. Guess who said that?" Patty moaned miserably. "Damn, I busted the door. Zeph's gonna have me own a kahiyaki fair this." Carne waved him off. "Relax. You're defending the restaurant. If anything, Zeph will probably give you a raise." The chefs were silent for a moment before bursting out with laughter. "Hey, where is Zeph anyway?" noticed one of the fighting cooks. Sanji, who was now fitted with a rope straight jacket, had a pretty good idea but didn't say anything about it. "So what are you planning for those guys on Krieg's boat?" Carne grinned like a cat in Wonderland. "I was thinking flambe, ha ha ha." "Sounds good," an all too familiar voice replied. Ice ran up the cooks' backs. They turned back to the doorway and watched in horror when the smoldering lump in it got back to its feet, patting the few small flames left out and looking no worse for wear. Don Krieg stood at his full height. His expensive fur coat and ugly shirt now just tatters at his feet, revealing an unscorched and dent-free armored chest. A fur cape behind him billowing in the slight wind. That had to be the worst thing I've ever eaten. All it did was leave ash in my mouth." Luffy, who was feeling rather left out at the moment, decided to give himself at least some dialogue. "Whoa, he's wearing armor." Ordinarily, the sight of a man getting up after being blasted by a cannonball would make men turn tail, but the fighting cooks of Baratie aren't ordinary men. They'll fight tooth and nail until their enemies are either running themselves or part of the menu. They all drew their own weapons. Not satisfied with conventional weaponry, the cooks hefted massive forks, spears that looked like overgrown table knives, and a large spoon that the unfortunate cook would always insist was a club that had been dented so much from crushing pirate skulls that it ended up cutlery-shaped. "Come on, men. So what if he's armored? It's only one man. Charge." Krieg growled. They dare still try to attack him. It was such insolence. 4 seconds. In only 4 seconds, every cook that had dared challenge Krieg suddenly jerked back as hot lead peppered them. sending each man as well as one or two nearby customers to the floor in complete agony. Those not on the floor writhing in pain stared up at Krieg. His armor had opened up all over, each hidden compartment revealing twin-barrel pistols poised to mow down everything in front of them. Never, and I mean never, defy me. I am the undisputed king of the East. I have the strength of 100 men. He flexed his armored biceps and hit his metal chest. The strongest wood steel armor money can buy. A clicking sound filled the air and everyone knew his guns were armed again. More hidden weapons strapped to me than everyone here has in the open. He then flexed his fist, showing a glittering gauntlet encrusted with clear gems and diamond fists to make my blows unstoppable. I have 5,000 men aboard 50 ships. I am the king. My word is law, and to defy me means death. Keep it up, Krieg. With all the hot air you're spouting, this old hunk of scrap wood may actually rise into the sky, said Zeph, who had came in halfway through Krieg's little speech, tossing down a heavy-looking sack which gave off the most delicious smells. Here, food for your entire crew. Chef Zeph, what are you doing? Yelled Carne. That caught the bigger Mont's attention. Zeph? This old man is Zeph? Chef, this is insane. Another cook wailed. Yeah, don't you know what's gonna happen now? Zeph kept his eyes firmly on Krieg. That depends on his remaining crew's spirits. His own crew quieted down. Our remaining? The tall-hatted chef nodded. Don't let his bluster and bravado fool you. I've seen many a man in such a state before, and it always means the same thing. The men moved in. Krieg gritted his teeth and Jin actually started crying. It means that the so-called king of the East year was chewed up and spat out by the Grand Line. The chefs murmured amongst themselves. The strongest pirate in this sea couldn't handle the Grand Line. What kind of hell ocean was that place? Krieg was still staring at Zeph, repeating his name under his breath over and over for about half a minute before he snapped back to what was unfortunately Hose Zeph, the pirate that doubled as his ship's cook, he said with only a small amount of respect in his voice. The former pirate snorted but nodded. Yeah, so what? I'm just a chef exclusively nowadays. Not by choice though, is it? Krieg looked down at the peg where Zeph's leg was once. The mighty red shoes Zeph, whose legendary kicks could shatter granite and leave his footprint in steel, whose legs were soaked in the blood of his enemies, being reduced to slinging second-rate slop to a bunch of stuffed shirts. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. If Zeph was moved in any way by those words, he didn't show it. The rest of the ship though had varying levels of surprise to find out that the old dude they served or were served by was once such a notorious man. Sanji looked more angry than surprised. Zeph just shrugged. I could care less if I had either of my legs. So long as I've got my hands, I can cook. That's all that matters to me. If you're trying to get a rise out of me by spouting old stories, then you're doing a lousy job. Which explains why he never used his hands. You went to the Grand Line, right? And you managed to sail those waters for an entire year and survive. If you were any kind of pirate back then, that means you probably wrote a logbook. Give it to me. He held his hand out unexpectedly. Zeph stared at the outstretched hand. Sorry boy, no can do. Krieg's eyes narrowed dangerously. That book is a testament to the exploits to me and the men who sailed with me. It's as important to me as this ship in my hands. I'd never give it to a blowhard like you. If I have to rip you apart to get it, I will, the pirate admiral bellowed, all his barrels aiming at the head chef of Bharati. The cooks gripped their weapons tighter while the Straw Hats watched the exchange in manners fitting their personalities. Usopp cowered under the table while Zoro watched the scene like others would a show. Nami had dismissed herself a while before to use the facilities. Luffy was still standing between the cooks and guests like an idiot. And where do you think you're going? Yelled the man once more before emptying the barrels on his right wrist into another man brave and foolish enough to try and flee, causing more diners to scream in terror. Taking several deep breaths, Krieg calmed down some. I may have fled the Grand Line, but I am still Don Krieg, the strongest pirate in this sea. The only reason I never stood a chance in that place was because I knew next to nothing about it. But with your logbook, your crew and this ship, that could all change. No way are we becoming pirates, growled Carne, wielding his battle spoon. We're cooks. Just because every other kitchen we worked in said otherwise before they fired us doesn't change that, said nameless cook number 3. The Bharati isn't just our workplace, it's our home, and we ain't turning it over to you." Another wave of hot lead silenced them. "You'll do as you're told," snarled Krieg. He'd had quite enough of people not bending over backwards for him for one day. "Captain, please. You shouldn't go." Jin tried reasoning with his captain only to be met with a boot to the face. "Don't you dare tell me what I shouldn't do, Jin, or I'll tie you to the front of one of the ship's cannons," Krieg said loud enough for everyone to hear. "As soon as I get that book, I'll gather more men to go with everyone here. Then I'll sail the full line and find Roger's great treasure, securing my place as the one true pirate king." You couldn't even be the king of a kiddie pool. It seemed to be quite the common occurrence in Bharati. It was either full of people screaming or yelling at the top of their lungs, or it was so quiet that you could hear a fly pass gas. Usually these two events went hand in hand. Someone says something big and dramatic, which is then followed by silence, which is followed by yelling. Luffy moved in front of Zeph and hands on his hips and not showing the smallest amount of fear towards the King of the East, much to Krieg's ire and Jin's awe. "What did you say, you little brat?" Krieg growled through his teeth. The king-to-be snorted at the king who was. "Did I stutter? I said you could never conquer the Grand Line. You're weak." To everyone's surprise, the massive man didn't look the least bit angry. Ordinarily you'd expect him to reach over and rip Luffy in half, but Krieg was genuinely stunned at the boy's bluntness. He'd been told he would never win, he'd been told that he was going down, he'd even been told that he was nothing compared to the power of his opponents, all before he'd beaten them down without mercy. What Luffy had just said to him, however, was something entirely different. This wasn't someone who was overconfident about their own power. This was someone who was sure about his lack of power. "Do you have any idea who you're speaking to, kid?" Krieg replied gravely. Luffy grinned. "Sure I do. The self-named pirate king whose entire army failed where crews 100 times smaller succeeded." The anger began to creep back onto the massive Mon's face. "You think you know anything about pirates? I've been sailing these waters for a decade just to get where I am. What have you done except wash dishes?" "Huh? Oh right, the apron." He tossed the offending apron asde. "It's just to pay back the old man. My true goal is to become Pirate King." "Ha ha ha ha, you're joking. You're barely even half my size and built like a toothpick. How's a runt like you gonna conquer the line?" Luffy grinned. "Easy. I've got my crew." He jabbed a thumb over to the table that Zoro was sitting at and Usopp was cowering behind. "Ha ha 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 ha, just two? Ha ha, you're just kids? Going to the Grand Line or to school?" Luffy looked offended. "Hey, that's not true. I also have two more, including him." He pointed back at Sanji, who looked offended. "Just four? Kid, I had 5,000 men in my armada aboard 50 ships. And in only 7 days all but the 100 aboard my flagship were wiped out." Uncaring aboard the gasping going around, Luffy once more shrugged. "So, Gold Roger became Pirate King with a crew barely half the size of the one you have left." Krieg aimed his arm right at Luffy's head. Gritting his teeth, he hefted the bag onto his shoulders and turned around. "I'm going to go give this food to my men. When I get back I want Zeph's journal, all the valuables in a nice little pile on the table, and everyone ready to submit to becoming my crew." He looked over to the diners who were again inching towards the other exits. "And don't try leaving. My old ship might be on its last legs, but the cannons still all work fine." With that he left, letting multiple people slump to the floor in relief. "Oh, thank Neptune. I thought he'd shoot us." "Hardly," said Zeph. "Eh? What makes ye say that, chef? You saw how trigger-happy he was," Patty said. Zeph shook his head. "Yeah. I also saw how itchy his trigger finger was. If he could shoot any of those guns he would have turned the boy into cheese 3 times over. That bozo ran out of bullets when he shot at you all last time." "You mean? Yeah. He was bluffing," he said, staring at where Krieg had stood, his eyes slowly rotating down towards Jin. "You still here? I would have thought you'd have followed Krieg like the loyal little dog you are." Jin recoiled slightly at the jab, but conceded the point. "I'm sorry, I didn't think he'd do this. I thought better of him." "Relax, boy. You have absolutely no reason to feel guilty." Jin's look of astonishment was matched only by the cook's looks of betrayal. "Chef, do you hear yourself? This is the man that brought Krieg here, a man that was saved by that bastard blonde." A meaty finger was pointed at Sanji. The restaurant is gonna be destroyed and we're all about to be coursed into the pirate life. And it's all Sanji's fault. Shut up you eggplants. Patty backed away from Zeph, as did others. Have you ever been hungry? And I don't mean skipped breakfast kind of hunger. I mean going weeks without a crumb of bread or a drop of drinkable water. It eats away at you in more ways than one. The most pushed to pitiful shells of themselves. And even the most noble can become monsters who are willing to do anything for a single bite. What's your point, chef? Asked Carne, clearly not noticing the old mont's forlorn glances at his peg. My point is that any of you who want to keep moaning and whimpering may as well head out the back door. Take a gamble to see if Krieg was bluffing about his cannons like he was his guns. He turned to the now very quiet customers who cowered under the old mont's glare. And that goes for you lot too. The cooks looked amongst themselves, relaying messages silently to each other. The sound of straining wood could be heard coming from Patty holding his giant dinner fork. Like we said, the Bharati is our home. Carne backed him up, and no one messes with Amon's home. Are you all crazy? Said Jin, his eyes filled with disbelief. You've barely seen what he can do. If you fight you'll all get slaughtered. And if we don't we'll be the galley slaves of the biggest in the blue. I say we take our chances. Said Sanji, pulling out a small tin of tobacco from his pocket and rolling another death stick. I'm a cook, so it's my duty to feed the hungry. But that's as far as it goes. As soon as they're fed I won't give a rat's ass about them. If your shipmates attack the Bharati then I won't have any problem pummeling them to grease. Not even you Jin. He said to the man with the dragon on his back. Sanji. He muttered breathlessly, staring at the younger man before Luffy got his attention. You never did say how your armada was wiped out. You must have been caught in a huge storm or something. Jin looked at him for a moment before he began to shiver uncontrollably, bringing his hands to his head like he had a migraine and resting his elbows on the floor. A storm? I wish we'd gotten off that easy. But the hell we went through was much worse. In all honesty I don't remember much about the first 6 days. They passed like a dream and like any dream I can only remember the faintest parts of them. But the last day, the 7th was something that'll burn in my mind forever. All I remember before then was sailing along then. He appeared. He? Said Zoro, interest piqued. I still can't believe it. That man, that single man without any provocation was able to annihilate our entire fleet. Even the normally cool-headed Zoro was blown away by that revelation. No way. How can almost 50 ships be scuppered by one man? Said Sanji without his customary cool. Jin shook even more. As soon as he was honest we couldn't escape. He breezed through the entire armada effortlessly, turning galleons to timber and killing whole crews with a single move. If a real storm hadn't kicked up and pulled us away from that massacre then the flagship would have been dragged into the locker as well. I'm not even sure if anyone else managed to survive that slaughter. I really don't want to remember it, but I know I'll never forget that man. Zoro, who had been following Jin's every word like Nami follows something shiny, practically felt his heart stop at what he said next. That man with the piercing hawk eyes. Clatter. What did you say? Man as a species prides itself on being a cut above the rest of the planet's inhabitants. This is because unlike say a bird or a fish we are not ruled by our instinct. We are a civilized race of mammals that can carry out any action in a thought-out and dignified manner. Unless we're hungry enough, that is. Then we may be no better than the dogs we leash. The sounds of eating aboard the battle-scarred ship was matched only by sounds that you would think only a dog could make. Men scrambling over each other, shoving one another out of the way and even spilling blood all to reach that loaf of bread or shank of meat. They didn't have time for the manners their mothers had beaten into their brains since they were young. They didn't have time to act like humans at all. The only thing they cared about was filing the ravenous holes in their bellies. AAAAWWWWOOO. The wolves in pirate garb gave one last final united howl to signal the return of their humanity. Eyes dull in every sense of the word filled once again with human intellect, wiping away droll and dirt from their faces and managing to stand upright. I feel great, cheered one pirate who seconds before had been praying to whatever deities he could think of. So good. Another patted his slightly distended stomach and looking like he was in nirvana. I thought that trip to the Grand Line would have killed us for sure. Krieg watched his replenished crew with a victorious grin. "I'm so glad you're all feeling better, because I don't plan to wait long to go back." The cheers and joyful crying halted immediately. The most feared crew in the east slowly turned to their captain and sincerely hoped he was joking. "CC Captain." Krieg didn't like the looks his men were giving him. "Is that cowardice I see?" He pointed a pistol at a random subordinate. Wait and act. Krieg's crew was reduced to 99. He was glad he remembered to reload his guns before handing over the food. He looked around his remaining crew. Anyone else still afraid? The pirates looked at each other for a few seconds before raising their arms and letting out a completely genuine and totally not forced cheer. If Krieg saw it as otherwise, then he really didn't care. Good. No, then on to more current matters. He stood up, deliberately drawing close to his men to show of his full impressive height. He pointed towards the fish-shaped ship they were floating next to. "You see that boat?" One crew member nodded. "Hey, yeah, isn't that the Berry something? The floating restaurant?" Krieg nodded and smiled wickedly. Not many would think that a ship that stupid-looking would be filled with pirates ready to rob them blind. That statement also had the dual purpose of measuring the intellect of his crew. He calculated his crew's IQ in direct contrast to how quickly their faces changed to show they got it. Bang down to 98. A smart pirate was a disobedient one. Zoro was bordering on livid and ecstatic. Johnny had lied to him about Hawkeye's Mahawk eating here, either that or had confused him with a flaming drunkard the cooks called Red Eyes. On the upside though, he had gained some measure of the legendary fighter's skill. Taking down 49 ship's crew and all with little visible effort gave him at least some clue as to how big a gap there was between him and his target. He didn't like it. Luffy on the other hand couldn't be happier at the news. If everyone was as strong as this Mahawk guy in the Grand Line, then he should have no trouble finding adventure. The armed men aboard the Bharati tensed as they heard their soon-to-be opponents draw closer. The sound of yelling and running echoing off of the walls. What few men brave customers brave enough to stand among the fighters did do after being handed whatever weapons they had spare. Including one boy brave and foolish enough to try impressing a gaggle of girls who had been very underwhelmed by their current partner's lack of courage. The yelling and thumping grew louder and louder. Inaudible murmuring becoming words that they could understand. "Out of the way. Move, you lousy cooks, I don't want to die." Weapons and fists fell limply to everyone's side at the sound of the pirates screaming in terror. One was about to say aloud what everyone was thinking until an even louder sound accompanied them. ZNGGG Krieg's flagship, a vessel more than twice the size of Bharati, was bisected. A single wave of air no thicker than a sheet of paper effortlessly cleaved through the wood and metal, leaving a clean cut on either side smoother to the touch than marble. The boat bobbed for a few seconds, like a man in shock. It was almost as if it wasn't sure what had happened to it. Then when it finally did, the ship began to warp, planks pulling every which way, and the cannon near the bisection began to crush itself until the balls inside could not handle the starhit. Explosion was followed by another, and another and another until the half-and-half vessel was flaming timber, being reduced to flotsam and jetsam smoldering on the waves, oddly enough not sinking for some reason. The cooks barged their way outside, falling over each other till every man was on deck. Everyone, even the normally stoic Zoro and fearless Luffy, were gaping at the sight. "What are you eggplants all gawking at? Weigh anchor before all that commotion capsizes us," yelled Zeph, making his cooking crew spring into action to stop everyone from drowning. Luffy bolted as soon as what had happened filtered through his dense skull. "Luffy, where do you think you're going? No way was Usopp letting someone as strong as his captain leave him to. I mean, he needed his subordinate here to defend the helpless civilians inside the restaurant." "Johnny and Yosaku are still on Mary," he called back, prompting his other present crewmates following behind. "Brother Luffy, help. Brother Zoro, save us." Luffy's worst fears were confirmed. Where once the two bounty hunters and his ship had been was just now the two bounty hunters, thrashing about in the violent waters trying to climb onto a ship too high to do so. Luffy looked around. No sign of Mary. He prayed that it wasn't planning on joining Krieg's ship. "Guys, what happened to Mary?" The two bounty hunters looked at each other, then cried out, "Brother Nami stole it." "What?" Usopp and even Zoro felt their legs buckle along with their eardrums from Luffy's cry. The wooden banister under their captain's fingers reduced to wood pulp in an instant. How could Nami just steal the ship? You two are swordsmen, for crying out loud, Zoro demanded of his old friends. Johnny and Yosaku quieted down, looking from left to right nervously while bobbing against the sea. She displayed an unparalleled skill with a bow staff and knocked us of the boat, Yosaku answered robotically. Indeed. Though we fought with great valor, it soon became apparent that she was to the staff what Brother Zoro is to the sword. We stood no chance, agreed Johnny, just as red-faced as his partner. They couldn't look the minty-haired teen in the eye. Usopp jumped up on the banister and peered out over the settling sea, just barely managing to make out a small ship on the horizon. Well, given that these two are still floundering about, she couldn't have set off that long ago. But given the wind, even if we could set off now, she'd have a good few hours head start. Zoro, dive in and fish those two out, ordered Luffy. Zoro nodded. He dived into the sea and with minimal effort tossed his companions up onto deck before jumping back on himself. We need a boat to go after her, stated the captain. Since Krieg didn't let any of the guests leave, that means that they still have some lifeboats left. Zoro grunted and shook his head. Forget about it. Like Usopp said, by the time we can leave she'll be long gone. Best just get a new ship. The sniper was indignant. Hey, I didn't say we shouldn't go after her. That boat's got all my stuff on it. The boat doesn't matter, Luffy said. The four guys looked at his oddly. We can always get another boat. But Nami is the only person I want as my navigator, he declared boldly. He didn't give them time to react. He picked Yosaku and Johnny up to their feet and addressed them. I need you two along with Usopp and Zoro to chase after my navigator. You think you can do that? SS Suyuri, said Yosaku uncertainly. Luffy curtly nodded and looked at his crewman with a serious expression. One that said, you're doing this. Zoro didn't have the patience nor Usopp the guts to argue with it and just followed after the other two. Zoro stopped and am stride, you coming? And leave that creep to these guys. He grinned, which Zoro mimicked before running off. Or at least he would have if he hadn't caught sight of a peculiar little boat bobbing in the waves. The cooks were aghast at the sheer devastation they were witnessing. The Krieg pirates scrambled wherever they were. Those who had managed to survive the ship's detonation on larger pieces of scrap wood attempted to hide themselves. Others on smaller pieces in the water already tried going under, which worked for about 10 seconds before they remembered they couldn't breathe water. Some even tried to climb onto the barati but were viciously kicked away by the staff. Krieg himself had said he had 100 hungry men on his ship. No one could see more than 50. How could this have happened? Said Patty without a breath in his voice. The ship may have been done fair, but it didn't look like it was gonna break in two like that. It wasn't, said Zeph while moving through the crowd towards the front. It didn't break. The weapons on board might have detonated and finished the job, but that galleon was split in two. Split? Cried Carne, cowering behind the swordsman. As in cut? How is that possible? The elder man looked through a cloud of smoke coming from one of the few pieces left dry, a figure becoming more visible by the second through it. Why don't y'all ask the one who did it? He pointed at the shape in the smoke. His form appeared in the black mist like the vampire of legend. His long black and crimson staying completely still despite the breeze that pushed his coffin-shaped boat forward. A black wide-brimmed feathered hat obscuring everything above his nose, showing facial hair styled so sharply that you could cut yourself on his pointed goatee, which lightly brushed against his bare chest adorned by only a small cross. Light rhythmic breathing showing he was currently asleep, while the black sword with the crucifix-shaped guard as wide as the blade was long kept him sitting straight. The Krieg pirates sweated bullets as the man drifted towards them, and that was before he woke and lifted his head. Then, everyone, bar who you would expect not to hit the brown note. There are a lot of ways to describe these kind of eyes, and I mean, lot. Hawk eyes was far from Juricule Mahawk's only epitaph, just his most widely used one. There were about 30 different ones based on his eyes alone. Hawkeye Mahawk, Demon Eye Mahawk, Juricule of the all-seeing eye were the most popular. It was just the way the man looked at you with his sharp yellows with their perpetually shrunken irises bored into your mind, searching every part of you until their owner knew everything about you at a glance, robbing you of your very soul. Him, Patty said in a seemingly confused voice, if only to hide the sheer terror he was experiencing. How could one man sink 49 ships all on his lonesome? That ship ain't big enough to carry a weapon that could do that. Zeph pointed at the religiously themed blade. His special weapon is strapped to his back. A sword? How could a blasted swordsman just cut up an armada? Zeph crossed his arms. You're only thinking of him as an ordinary human being. That man is one of the biggest sharks in the most dangerous ocean. He is Jurikul Mahak, the greatest swordsman alive. One man aboard the wreckage was apparently immune to the all-consuming powers of Mahak's gaze. Whether this was because he was too stupid to be scared or that he didn't have a soul to begin with wasn't all that clear, but it made this nameless grunt stand up and address the deadly man. Damn you! You sadistic monster. It was bad enough you start killing us for no reason. But why did you have to follow us all the way here? The swordsman tilted his head and looked over, clearly mulling over what he should say and if he should really bother answering. Ultimately decided he gave his answer. Because you woke me up. Not the best excuse for mass genocide, or at least that's what the grunt that looked kind of like Usopp thought when he pulled out both pistols and discharged him at the man. Clang-thunk, weapons fell from slack fingers and mouths fell open from slack jaws. In the time it took the bullets to travel the merest distance between point A and B, Mahak had taken out his massive SWTHE path of the oncoming fire. But instead of blocking it with the flat or even slashing forward and cutting them like other less skilled masters would, he swept his sword from left to right. Catching the shots with the tip of the sword, he gently nudged the speeding metal to the right and the other shot to the left, making both of them drastically veer of course from their intended target, instead embedding themselves in someone else, reducing the crew by 2 more. The shooter blinked, stared at his guns, then back at the man who was re-sheathing his weapon. What the hell? How could you miss? He's not even 20 yards away, for crying out loud, growled another faceless drone. He didn't miss, answered Zoro, who had miraculously appeared behind Krieg's pirates. It's just that Hawkeye was able to make your rounds change course with his sword. He ignored the gun-toting grunt's rude request for his name. It's hard enough to deflect a bullet, but to actually control its path. I've never seen such subtle skill before. Mahak heard every word and was impressed by the young Mont's own keen eyes. Without subtlety, a sword is little more than an iron bar. Zoro couldn't help the Luffy-class idiotic grin that sprouted on his face. You're everything your reputation says you are. The greatest swordsman who ever lived. A useless title but fitting nonetheless. Agreed, Black Blade Mahak. I can tell by the grin on your face that you're more than just impressed by my skill, boy. What is it you want? Zoro's grin widened further. He took several big steps back and unsheathed Watto. Your title. You look bored, so what say we have a match? It was like a guppy challenging a sea king, not something you see every day, and were rendered speechless when it did. Both of these men were fear warriors in their own right. Zoro's 3 swords had just now alerted the pirates as to who he was, making them dive off for the next largest bit of wreckage. While Mountain Cleaver, Mahak made even Luffy calm down to watch the impending fight. Luffy! Yelled his sniper behind him. The passenger boat drifting away from the Barati while everyone else was occupied. We don't have time for this. If we don't leave right now, Nami's going to be out of sight. Luffy heard him just fine. He just didn't care. Mahak stared up at Zoro from his seated position, never moving a muscle as his boat eerily drew closer, docking against what used to be Krieg's deck without any effort from its owner and remaining completely still despite having to rope or anchor to secure its position. Weak, Jurikul said, stepping out of his boat and standing about 20 feet from his opponent. It goes without saying that you're the mosquito who dares to challenge the elephant here. I can easily tell that you know I am much stronger than you, yet you insist on fighting me. Do you have some sort of hidden power? Or are you really just that ignorant? Zoro grunted and put his sword in his mouth, still completely understandable despite this. Neither. I know I have no chance against you right now. But my ambition is to beat you. I made this as a promise to a friend, and I refuse to back out of it. Admirable, if suicidal. He uncrossed his arms. Nami stood aboard the deck of her ship, smiling an impossible smile that showed both happiness and immense grief. I'm sorry, she whispered out towards the direction of those she betrayed. I'm so sorry. The world seemed to stand still just as the 2 combatants did. The waters grew still. Birds overhead landed to watch the oncoming battle along with everyone else. Pirate, cook, passenger, it didn't matter. To see 3, sword, Zoro and Crusader, Juricule was a once-in-a-lifetime event. Zoro stood at the ready, all 3 of his weapons unsheathed. Opposite him Mihawk still stood with his arms at his sides. "Well?" Zoro said a little impatiently. "Bring out your sword already?" Mihawk sighed a little. "If you insist." He pulled out his weapon, but instead of reaching for his back, he reached for the cross around his neck and tugged at it, pulling out a knife not even 5 inches long. You could imagine how Zoro must have felt. "Are you kidding?" "Hardly. I'm not someone who uses a cannon to hunt rabbits. Which is exactly what your child. You may very well be the strongest swordsman of the East. But being the greatest, anything, of the East is a pitiful fallacy of a reputation." Zoro glared as Mihawk continued his verbal beatdown. "Of all the oceans, the Red Line and Grand Line divides this world into the East Blue is the absolute weakest. That armored dolt over there learned that the hard way." He looked over at Krieg, who involuntarily shuddered under Mihawk's gaze despite the man being so far he could hardly make out the mon's face. "I'm sorry to say that this is my smallest knife. If you do well enough I may have to upgrade to a butter knife." "You sure are cocky for a man that's about to die." Zoro leapt at his opponent. His swords angled to lop the dandy mont's head clean from his shoulders. "Oni! Ggrii!" He swung at him with fierce enough to carve through rock. Victory in one blow. Clang! The vibrations ran up his arms and through his aching mouth and down towards his boots. He had put as much strength as he had, enough to smash through granite into that attack. Yet all it took, Island Splitter, Mihawk, to stop it was a pocket knife held between his thumb, his index and his ring finger. The teen swordsman groaned while trying with all his might to push forward, but as hard as he tried he couldn't budge an inch under the seemingly non-existent effort of Juricule Mihawk. "I can't move. I knew I couldn't win, but our difference can't be this vast. No way." He jumped back from the knife wielder only to jump right back, arms swinging. He swung as fast as he could, as unpredictably as he could. Not even he was all that sure which way he was attacking half the time. His arms were reduced to blurs and his blades to flashes of reflected sunlight. But for all his skill he was shocked to see Mihawk keeping pace with him, and considering that he was swinging 3 weapons almost past the visible spectrum while the plume-hatted man was keeping pace with only one. A new epitaph sprung to his mind for him. "Godspeed, Mihawk. I won't accept it, I won't accept sure complete defeat." His thoughts turned to the past. Memories of a beautiful girl with unsurpassed skill filling his mind. Promises to each other that were dashed before they destroyed before they could be fulfilled. And another being born from grief that not even this monster before him could break. Mihawk parried strike after strike with all the skill it took a boy to swat a fly. More intrigued by Zoro's expression than Watto coming within inches of puncturing his famous eyes. "What is it that drives you? What makes you pick a fight you know you can't win?" His knife flashed forward with even greater speed, the flat catching Zoro in the face with a force that sent him hurtling back into what used to be Krieg's cabin wall. Luffy had to grab the back of Yosaku and Johnny's coat and threw them to the floor. This was Zoro's goal and no one had the right to interfere. He coughed harshly, a glob of blood spewing out and staining his white shirt. He pulled both swords behind the left side of his back and crouched. Mohawk raised his trinket again. "Boy, don't be foolish. Tiger. Pathetic. Hunt, Sklitch." What was everyone looking at? Zoro wondered why everyone watching the fight was suddenly looking at him like something horrible had just happened. He'd taken down Mihawk, of course. How else could he have attacked the man without taking a hit? Did he avoid a hit? It certainly didn't feel like he was hurt. In fact, he'd never felt better. He felt rather cool despite the noon sun beating down on him. Even shivering a little. Mihawk looked good too. Boy, for a guy who'd just taken a crippling blow he looked completely unharmed. But that was impossible. Zoro had attacked him and came out of it uninjured, so that means Hawkeye's really getting cold. The guy was saying something, but it was really hard to hear him. No matter he could make it out well enough. "Step back before I gut you." Why would he? The world started moving again, and Zoro knew pain. He wanted to cry out. To drop the sword in his mouth, to bellow his mouth and retch the dagger from his chest. He wanted so much to drop onto the deck, to return to the lucid dream he had just came from. The thing is though, when you want to do everything you end up doing nothing. So he just stood there like an idiot with 4.5 inches of steel in between his ribs. "I can't back down," he said with blood pouring out of his mouth in little streams. "I promised to be the best. If I back down, even against you, my dreams will die." Mihawk agreed. "That is defeat. Hey, I'll never accept that. I have a blade mere inches from your heart, weakling. I could easily end your life instead." "Then do it. I prefer death to defeat." He almost dropped in relief when the cross knife was pulled from his insides. "Devil Slayer," Mihawk clipped his knife back in place and reached for his back. "Boy, tell me your name." "Roronoa Zoro," he relied, holding his 3 swords in a clockwise windmill stance. "A strong name. It's been a long time since I met someone of your level with such brazen courage." He lifted his true weapon from his back, letting Zoro and the rest of those assembled see Kokuto Yuru, the strongest sword in the world. As long as he was tall and with a blade that pulled in as much light as the Straw Hat Captain himself. The greatest of the supreme grade swords. "As a reward, I will let you face this sword and an instant of my true skill." Zoro grinned and pulled his hands together. He started exchanging his weapons between his hands, faster and faster in a circular pattern until the rapid spinning made them look like a buzzsaw. Wind started blowing from them like an industrial strength fan. Distortions in the air visible for all to see. Santoryu hidden technique. Mihawk drew back. One shouldn't call out their attack names. Then charged straight at the younger man. Zoro did the same. 3,000 worlds. Die, revised. The met. They broke. He lost. Zoro looked at the handles which had once been his 2 other weapons. Nameless blades he'd picked up from somewhere he really didn't care about remembering, but still made of steel which Juricule hadn't just cut through, but utterly shattered. He knew he wouldn't win, but this was the last straw needed to make it really sink in. No use avoiding the inevitable. He stood back up and turned around, his arms as far apart as possible. Warlord, Mihawk was puzzled for one of the few rare occasions in his life. "What are you doing?" Zoro still smiled. A man doesn't take a coward's wound, especially not a swordsman. Not even Stone Face, Mihawk could hold back his own asterisk and tea-eating grin. Magnificent. Sklitch blood followed in the winds that the sword generated, spraying as far as a half-mile away from the body it used to circulate when the world's greatest swordsman cut him from shoulder to hip. He hung for a moment before falling back and crashing into the sea. "Brother!" His old comrades dived in after him in the hopes they wouldn't be too late. Luffy on the other hand dived for someone else. Wormhole. Forget the sword fight. What really shocked everyone there was when inky black smoke poured out of the chore boy, speeding towards Juricule Mihawk like an arrow. Just before contact the darkness bulged slightly and a pale fist exploded from it aimed for the mustachioed Mont's face. A blow which the world's greatest swordsman avoided with ease. Luffy wasn't done. Thick black smoke poured of his body and headed at Mihawk in a wave that blocked the horizon and blotted out the sun, an attack so massive that no one could ever hope to dodge it. That didn't stop Mihawk from cutting through it. Darkness, intangible and unstoppable, tore like cheap cloth when the black blade passed through it, like the sword was eating it. That didn't last long, it was like cutting a river. It kept coming at him without losing pace, every slash only serving to multiply to black tendrils racing towards him, pushing him further and further back, never growing closer or further than a few inches away from hitting him. "Impressive. I certainly didn't expect a Logia user here," commented Mihawk while cutting away at blackness trying to swallow his left leg. "Of course you fight like almost every other Logia user I've ever encountered, hoping to overwhelm me with sheer force." Those words were rendered Mo when Luffy once more burst from the black shroud with a haymaker that Mihawk barely avoided. This boy and his crewmate were just full of surprises. "If you're worried about your swordsman," he said, making the boy stop his next charge, "you need not worry. I made sure not to kill him. I despise weakness, but I despise wasted talent even more." Yosaku pulled his sworn brother from the drink, checking his chest, and was relived on so many levels that his chest continued to rise and fall steadily. That smiling face was all Luffy needed to see to know that his swordsman was alright. "Hear me, Roronoa Zoro. Now is not your time to die," Mihawk shouted out, totally destroying any quiet mystery he might have had. You have only started your journey. Discover yourself, discover your power and live to surpass me. He turned back to Luffy. With a crewman of such ambition, I imagine you share such lofty goals. With a rare serious, anger doesn't count. Luffy nodded back, I'm going to be Pirate King. He smirked, sending yet more spine-tingling. Indeed. To find those who still dream at this late in the Golden Age is rare indeed. With a flutter of his coat he turned back to return to his boat, leaving a puzzled captain wondering what he meant. He didn't have long to wonder though, since Usopp's ear and brain-piercing cry broke his eardrum. Luffy, he's alive, barely breathing, missing 7/10 of his blood, and has a cut deep enough to kill a giant, but nonetheless alive. Functioning even as shown when he lifted Watto high into the air. Mihawk. The man listened intently. From now until we face each other again. No matter how long it takes. Until I become the greatest swordsman alive. I will never lose again. That okay with you, oh Pirate King? Kishishi, not at all. Mihawk put his sword back in place. It wasn't every day that one from the Demon Sea was surprised in the East Blue of all places. Today was a good day. I hope, Straw Hat, that we cross paths again someday. Bang ba bang bang, several bullets headed straight at the man. All of which were avoided in a blur. Krieg sneered and pressed a plate of his armor, reloading all his hidden barrels. Damn. You really are a cut above the rest. The Armada leader said with a voice that made it sound like he'd already won. What's the matter, Pigeon Eyes? Didn't you want to take my head and collect my reward? Hawkeyes stared at the man, making said man quake a little on the inside when he felt a hole burning through his skull. If I'd wanted small change, I could find any number of weaklings closer to home with bounties far exceeding yours. This chase was just for amusement, and now I am satisfied. I'll take my leave. Weakling. I'll show you a weakling. Die. All his barrels fired. Kreef was apparently a very slow learner. Juricule agreed. He pulled out Kokatu Yuru again and cut down on the waterfront, creating a massive column of water that blocked everything from view and forcing both Krieg and Luffy to find new footing. When it subsided, Warlord, Juricule Mihawk was nowhere to be seen. The surge the eruption created. Usopp's boat carrying the bounty hunters active and former was carried further out against the passenger's will. Luffy, help! The coward called back. His captain once more vanishing in black smoke only to reappear back on Baratie. Usopp set sail. I'll catch up when I repay my debt. Didn't have argued even if he didn't already agree with him. He just told him to be quick about it and sailed off after the trader. Luffy turned his attention from his retreating crew back to Krieg, who was dragging himself onto yet another decent-sized piece of wreckage that had somehow not sunk yet. He looked back towards the cooks, half of whom were missing due to Zeph instructing them to help the remaining guests flee out back on their boats. They were standing their ground well enough, but the boy could see the fear they had at risking their lives. It wasn't hard for even him to put two and two together, if the answer was fish. Okay, kid. Hey old man. He addressed Mega Stash Man. If I take out these guys, can you call of our debt? The chef huffed. Call it off. Kid, you take care of these guys, I'll call it off. Give you Sanji for your crew and give you a lifetime's pass to eat here for free. 3, 2, 1. Yami Yami absorption. The tidal wave of darkness sprung once more from the boy. Branching off in every which way, one of the men who had seconds before about to attack the restaurant on fear of death were trying to escape. Some were swallowed by the great mass, while those being chased by the smaller branching tendrils were grabbed by the pencil-thin lines, which then flowered to consume them and mute their shrieks of terror. If there was anything more important to Luffy than the words, Pirate King, it was free food. Krieg watched in abject horror at the sight of his crew being picked off one by some devil freak. The arrogant man in Kresge demanded he fight this boy to prove he was the strongest in the East. But the smart man in him realized he'd have to do something or else he'd be pulled into that creeping darkness like his men were. He was down to 25 already. The bullets some were firing were consumed as instantly as they were, and Mihawk's sword must be something else because all slashing at it did for normal humans was get them pulled in quicker. He could barely make out the boy clinging to the Baratie, his head moving about parallel to the next man being pulled in. So the kid has to be able to see what he's doing, huh? Not good when your power blots out everything. Now he just has to He blacked out before the next thought entered his head. Well, that was incredibly easy. 20 seconds. That's how long it took Luffy to absorb the entire remnant of Krieg's armada. Just 20 seconds. The boy smiled wide. He definitely managed to recover most of his strength after his burnout on Usopp's island. Now to just get Sanji and… Why are you all staring at me like that? Everyone, even Jin who he'd grabbed and dragged onto the deck, was giving him a death glare, making him feel mere inches tall. Do it right, said Patty slowly. What? Carne answered this time. Krieg, and that big shiny guy who looked strong. Spit them out and fight for real. Again what? Zeph stepped forward. You can't just end the fight in half a minute. That cheats everyone who's been waiting all this time to see a royal smackdown between you and Krieg. A chance for Sanji to prove how strong he is, and to give Jin a reason to question why he's loyal to that mutton-chopped idiot. Do I have to? Glare? Sigh asterisk release? The two aforementioned men were spat out of the smock like bullets, skipping on the water's surface one or twice before crashing nearby. He cracked his knuckles loudly and popped his neck. Well, looks like I had to do this the hard way. Krieg gasped for air, clutching his armored chest and staring at the wreckage he was floating on. What was that place? A massive world full of nothing except those blubbering infants that used to be my crew. His armor was totaled. The nigh impenetrable wood steel had been crushed like a tin can, pressing tightly against his broad chest and making it very hard for him to breathe. Though not hard at all for someone with superhuman strength to simply rip off. He peeled the steel from himself and in a decisive move flung it as hard as he could at the Straw Hat Boy, who immediately jumped out of the way just as the speeding metal demolished the section where he'd been standing a moment ago. Krieg wasn't out of ammo though. His bracers, barrels, anything he could grab was thrown at the boy, forcing Cooks to scatter and thanks to Krieg's quick wit forcing Luffy to make a final leap onto yet another small floating piece of debris which for whatever reason hadn't yet sank. Just as Krieg intended. Let's see how strong you are at the bottom of the sea, he bellowed and with a mighty roar grabbed onto a large piece of protruding mast, ripping it from where it was bolted and launched it like a spear. Luffy jumped again, his leg strength more than enough to manage such small distances. However, that left the wooden pole to rocket towards the Barty with enough mass and force behind it to demolish a good part of the ship. It's gonna scuttle the ship, screamed Patty, taking a dive out of the way along with the rest. Sanji, crack red-legged Zeph, wasn't just known for being a great cook. In his prime he was known for being able to take anything down with a sweep of his legs. Desperation had claimed that which he was feared for, but fate had delivered him something in exchange. A boy who not only had a passion for food, but a chance for Zeph to pass on his style so that it would not die. The result was about as good as you expected. The mast splintered under the tip of Sanji's shoe. The speeding log cracking at the middle since the tip was now trying to veer in a direction that the rest of it didn't want to go in. Cracks ran up the entire length of the wood until the entire mast fragment was turned into wood chips raining about the Bharati crew like brown rain, causing several splinters in the saucer-sized eyes and wide-open mouths, but otherwise fine. Luffy whistled. Now he really wanted this guy on his crew. Sanji landed back on deck with feline grace. Not a hair out of place or a flake of ash fallen from his death stick. I didn't think pirate fought by just throwing things, he commented a little too loudly. No one was really that amused though, especially since most were sporting large amounts of pointy timber on their tongues. T-Thonthi, the burly armed fry cook, grabbed his lapels while glaring a hole through him. Carne held his spoon close to his neck. T-Ona Thil O, Carne growled past his wooden tongue. Shut up, a voice said right before the two were sent careening into the side of the boat. A third man climbed up on deck, snapping and scrapping against everything with the massive shield covering his entire body. The smaller shields strapped to his knees, elbows and shins bumping against things with every step. If this is our new ship, then we'll definitely need to do something about the room, the man said, towering over the downed Sanji. So you think you're pretty strong, huh? Let's see how hard you can kick when you're up against Pearl the invincible wall. Sanji really didn't consider this guy too much of a threat, especially with that goofy bulbous helmet he had on, but Zeph was a good judge for this sort of thing, so that meant he was probably strong. You're breaking the ship. He dragged the cigarette down to the tip in one breath, before launching at Pearl with one leg extended right for his face. Thom! Another waterspout erupted, yet more wood sent beneath the drink with every clash between the super-strong combatants. Ordinarily Krieg wouldn't be caught dead in a fistfight unless he was out of weapons. However, his attempts to take this brat down with his pauldron, hidden stake machine gun had failed miserably when they were sucked into that evil place the boy sent him to. Though from what he'd seen, he seemed to restrain himself when he looked ready to pull him back in. With that in mind, Krieg decided to use his indestructible diamond fists to beat the boy into a bloody smear, never expecting him to be able to match him in raw strength. He was right. Well, almost right. Krieg was just barely pure physical power, and though the Don was big, he was by no means slower. For every one rib-cracking blow the newbie slammed into him, he got in one or two bone-jarring hits of his own. Luffy ducked under a clumsy swing from the man not used to straight-up brawling and launched himself into his stomach, forcing the air out of his stomach. Catching himself in a handstand, he pushed up and wrapped his legs around the older Mont's neck, squeezing in a powerful sleeper hold that would snap a thinner Mont's neck while simultaneously hammering his free fist into Krieg's stomach again. Krieg coughed up blood and what little air he had left in him. He could see black dots forming quickly in his eyes, but not quick enough to stop his sending both armored rows of knuckles into Luffy's unprotected sides while he still had his fist in his gut. "Ah!" Luffy screamed, his weakness to pain increasing the already crippling blow's effect and forcing him to unlock his legs. Krieg immediately grabbed his right leg with both hands and started whipping him around. Time to learn to swim. He flung the boy out into the sea. Back on Baratie, as was barely any better for Sanji. Pearl's shields were far too smooth and well polished to get anything short of an all-out direct hit on without his kicks sliding off. He couldn't even build a stronger attack, which took precious seconds that his opponent wasn't willing to give him. He'd been forced to lead the battle inside the restaurant, which was now devoid of customers. "Told you," the eternally boastful Pearl said to the panting cook. 60+ battles without a single scratch. "You can kick till your legs break, but I'll still be standing when everything's over." The cook groaned and stood back up. "I hate guys like you." "What? You mean stronger, better looking and completely invincible? No, fat, stupid and big-headed. Fat? I'll crush you with a fist like polished silver." The man thrust a huge pearl-covered shield at Sanji, who evaded it despite its surprising speed. "That it?" His leg lashed out to strike at Pearl's unguarded side only to be blocked. "Can't hit me," Pearl backhanded at Sanji, who narrowly dodged again by diving to the floor and sweeping Pearl's feet out from under him. The man fell to earth with a heavy thud. "Neither can you. You might be strong, but that stupid shield makes you about as graceful as rampaging bull." His leg swung high above his head before crashing down on Pearl's face with a wadoom, sending a shock-wave through the hardwood floor. He lifted his foot, noting with some disdain that he had a few spots of red on his shoes. He wasn't particularly fond of Zeph's old nickname and hated to get anything on his shoes. He grabbed the turtle man by his oversized guard and started to pull him out of the restaurant, until a hand gripped his ankle. "Who needs grace?" Clang! Krieg stared after the diminishing form of Luffy carefully. Reaching for his shoulder gun again, he pulled to a canister and attached it to the gun's nozzle, pointing it right at the boy until he actually saw him go in the sea, grinning wickedly when he saw a splash. "That kid's done for. Those who eat the devil fruit are completely helpless underwater." He turned about face and aimed his weapon at the Baratie, causing Jin to stand up in horror. "Don Krieg, you don't need to kill them," Krieg smirked. "I know." He called back. "Just as long as they agree to serve me as my new crew, I'll spare all your lives." The cooks were frozen in place. Not one of them stupid enough to believe that the pirate wouldn't fire if they dared try and escape. "Good. Now Jin. Break that old failure's peg so he doesn't try anything." Warily Jin did as he was asked. The old man didn't put up any fight, he just went to his knees, staring at the pirate when he snapped the wood. "Don't look at me like that. I'm a pirate, I follow my captain's orders." Zeph still stared. "So was I, but unlike your precious Don, my men didn't follow me because they were afraid I'd kill them." "Shut up." He pulled out a weird-looking double-barreled shotgun and jammed it against Zeph's head, much to Krieg's amusement. "Ha ha ha, well done, Jin. As expected from my first mate. Clang, ha, and just as expected from my second mate, nice work Pearl. Pearl walked out of the restaurant. Sanji's head in his right hand dragging the rest of him along. He tossed Sanji against the guard railing where he retched violently when his back hit the hard wood. He fell to his knees. He tried standing up until Krieg's voice rang out again. Jin, if that blonde nitwit even as much as moves I want you to blow Zeph's head off. Don't question me Jin. The pirate looked back down at the former one, who was still looking up at him. It made him feel like a little boy who'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Pearl had no such feelings of guilt. He sneered and came further out the restaurant, banging his shields together causing a sinister yet somehow pleasant ringing. He stood over Sanji, who had taken not moving under threat of his mentor's death to heart. You heard him Blondie move and Jin will blow the old mont's head off. He sneered, looming over Sanji and loudly cracking his joints. The cook, panting harshly looked over at Jin and Zeph. The former staring at him with eyes fully open. He looked over to the cooks who were all far too frightened to do anything. Go ahead. Clang 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 clang. It was violence on a level that few ever saw in this world. There was no flash, no spectacular names for what he was doing. He wasn't performing some crazy extravagant maneuver. Pearl was beating him pure and simple. The oversized dandy pulled his fist back and decked him as hard as he could, grinding his shield into the cook's jaw before slowly pulling it back and bringing it forward again. He had a grin like he drank Joker juice, taking joy in every blow that caused further and further turned his weapon into a bloody mess. Clang. Nobody dared move. The sight in front of them rendering their legs like jelly. Even Jin felt the gun in his hand go limp before tightening his grip. Pearl. That's enough. He whispered, only to be ignored by the overzealous pirate who continued his brutalizing. It continued for who cares how long. An ominous ringing and the occasional gull on board the mast were the only sounds made by anyone, until Krieg raised a hand. Alright Pearl, that's enough, no point beating a corpse. Pearl didn't look like he agreed but complied anyway, standing up and moving away from the bloody mess, and much to his shock so did Sanji. The bloodied blonde reached for his tobacco tin again, the case slipping out of his fingers and spilling the contents everywhere. Damn. That was the last of it too. He flung the papers away, seeing no point in them anymore. He looked over in his mentor's direction. Pearl and Jin looking like they hardly expected him to get back up. You call that a beating? Crap cook over there calls it a love tap? Pearl grit his teeth in anger. Pearl symbols. The two shields came crashing into either side of his head. He was grateful that he was so thick-skulled because it felt like if he was any less so then his head would pop like soufflé. Sanji. Jin once more almost dropped his gun and rushed to his savior's aid, but a glare from his idol made him remember himself. What's the matter? Krieg's word is law, ain't it? Jin didn't ever bother to respond. Sanji fell to his knees, gasping for life but did not pass out. He got back to his feet, coughing violently. Now we're up to Patty's love taps. Good for you. Sanji, why aren't you fighting back? Growled Zeph much to Jin's shock. Just tear this bozo a new one and get this stupid ordeal over with. He shook his bloody head. Can't do that, old man. I fight back and Jin blows your head off. So, I'm an old man, you stupid eggplant. You're not even 20 yet. Do the math. I can't do that, Sanji yelled. This way I can repay you for everything you gave up for me. You've already given up too much. I won't take anything else. Inservation here. Oh, and for those saying that I should include right now, consider this. Would you really be reading fanfiction right now if you'd never read the manga? You gave up your leg for me. You gave up your reputation for me. How could I ask you to give up your damn life for me? Haven't I taken enough? Patty, Carne and the rest of the cooks were silent. For once in their entire career aboard the Bharati they were looking at the younger man with awe and respect. They had no idea of just how much Chef and his apprentice went through. I'd always thought he'd lost it in a fight. Zeph must really care about that craphead Ta eat his own leg so Sanji could have the food. Krieg found the whole thing hilarious. He'd once looked up to Zeph as a Grand Line survivor, and it was in his home waters where he'd lost almost everything. Jin was finding it harder and harder to keep Zeph pinned, even though the old man made no movement to escape his hold. He'd never heard of anything so selfless. Pearl was completely uninterested in stories that weren't about how handsome he was. He needs Sanji in his gut, forcing his to collapse again. He looked over to his captain to get permission to just end this. Don? Can I just kill him now, Captain? Captain? What's wrong? Where seconds ago he was grinning wickedly, he was now clearly sweating. Even from the distance they were apart, Pearl could still clearly see the man was worried about something. He turned to Jin to ask what his hero was so worried about when he saw the shorter guy was just as scared. Was it him? Well, maybe for Jin. He always did think he deserved to be first mate instead. The Don though was just confusing as hell. Why would the strongest pirate in the East be scared of his second mate? Wait. What was that taste? Funny, kind of coppery. Were his lips wet with something? He rubbed his mouth with the back of his hand to see what it was, and froze. B. B-U. 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 Pearl, keep calm, it's only a little nosebleed, Krieg shouted in vain. Yeah, you're not in the jungle anymore, you don't need to. Blood. My blood. Danger. Danger. The hulking man who moments ago was calm and dandy was historical. Backing away from Sanji back into the dining hall. Banging his shields together hard and fast. Crap. Jin, leave that failure and get Pearl out of there, Krieg ordered. His first mate did as commanded, eager to leave the withering glare of Zeph. He grabbed onto the frantic pirate's side and with considerable strength dragged him outside and tossed him overboard, landing next to the Don. Danger. Danger. Not here, Jin Yu Fu. DDAANNGEERR. FFW whoosh. Pearl wasn't just banging his weapons together for no reason. You see, despite his well-groomed appearance, comprehensive understanding of the spoken word and love of valuable objects such as his namesake, he grew up in an environment which didn't teach him about any of those things, the jungle. Lost on a tropical island when he was but a lad, Pearl was forced to raise himself in the harsh and unforgiving tropical woods. Facing the fiercest predators and coming close to starvation near 100 times. Such an upbringing would turn any man into a battle-hardened jungle god, but not Pearl. No, through all the trails and tribulation he clung to his cowardice. Rather than man up and face his fears head-on, he developed another considerably more idiotic method to keep them away. Setting himself on fire. It wasn't long after that he learned it would be less painful with shields. He lit up like a birthday cake, the eruption of flame causing Krieg to involuntarily step back and fall right off the boards he was standing on lest he lose his eyebrow privileges. Damn it, Pearl. He grumbled loudly. He grabbed onto the wood again to climb back up, only to slip when he found himself being pulled down. What the? He lifted himself up harder, for as hard as he pushed up the very ocean seemed to be pulling him down. Even his superhuman strength was giving under the increasing pressure on his feet and the desire not to have his legs torn off. He wasn't the only one affected, mind you. The water, as far as anyone could see, was becoming choppier and the currents stronger. The Bharati started rocking more and more. The ship that had already seen its fair share of shaking today was already starting to feel the stress. The timbers groaning and giving way slightly. The jetsam that should have long since sunk finally got the message and went down to the locker, leaving only 3 larger pieces still full of air to hold them up. Grr. Rog, I will. Go. Under, he grunted before lifting up his leg and with Herculean effort planted his foot up. Followed by another, then drew himself up to his full height. Aha! The boards under his feet gave way a second later. It went unnoticed by everyone except himself, of course, since Pearl had decided to start lobbing flaming pearls at the ship they wanted. Krieg struggled against an ever-strengthening current, but it was futile. He could only be drawn closer and closer the forming whirlpool, and almost forgot to hold his breath when he saw a massive sphere of darkness at the epicenter. You can't really think very well when you're skimming across the surface of the sea at about 100 miles an hour. Especially not someone who can't say thinking is a specialty of his. Heck, he couldn't even tell the blue of the sky to the blue of the sea until his fingers brushed the water, and by then it was too late. He knew he had to act fast before he was submerged enough for the curse to take effect. His power flared off him in all directions, shooting out of every pore and coating him completely just before he was pulled under. Little known fact. If the water isn't actually touching the devil fruit user, then it doesn't turn against them. The sea in every which direction of Luffy was rapidly being pulled into his dark dimension. Below and above were draining towards him in a screw you to physics. inadvertently creating a whirlpool that grew faster than the costs of a movie starring Johnny Depp. His smoke continued to stretch out, reaching out every which way headless to the literal thousands of gallons of liquid was being pulled into it in a desperate attempt to find any indicator of which way up was. Luffy had managed to seal himself into a small pocket of air inside the black cocoon. Everything that his darkness swallowed was released in front of him so he could tell which direction he should wormhole out. He could see clearly by the way, since it would be pretty stupid for someone like him to not be able to see in the dark. A fish. Who'd have thought the sea had so many fish? Fish Don Krieg. Fish. Oh right, protect the ship. We can't. They res too many. Why is it hard to put out a fire when we're surrounded by water? The cooks scattered about the ship, trying desperately to put out the blue flames that now covered the Bharati, courtesy of the human flamethrower not far away. Jin had abandoned his position over Zeph to try and help. The Don wanted the ship and it wouldn't do any good if it was burned down. Fire pearls. Patty heads up. I got it, the man yelled, holding out his fork in a guard position in the path of the flaming sphere. He was driven back a few feet but succeeded in catching it before it caused another fire to sprout up. Phew, that was close. Jin and Carne were among the few who could actually catch them all, with Jin still calling out in vain for Pearl to stop lobbing flaming namesakes at them. But the man was far too frantic and desperate to keep Sanji away from him to notice or even care. Sanji danced around the man, the flame having only increased the field of his defense. There was no way he could get anywhere close to his unguarded areas without trying to kick him in the face again for all the good it did last time. He needed to stop him now or Zeph's dream will be turned to cinders. Bloosh, a huge mass shot out of the water, heading straight for Pearl with the speed of 4 impact. Sanji dove out of the way and a smaller mass broke off the larger one. It slammed right into Pearl's flaming back, sending the turtle lurching forward. The protrusion dead center of his torso shield smashed right through the drifting wood, causing water to start gushing through it and putting out the strangely beautiful flame. Craig clambered off his second mate, growling fiercely and ripping off his now ruined spiked cape. Yet another weapon from his arsenal ruined because of that upstart. Pearl, get up. He hoisted the man back to his feet. Hey, Don Krieg. What's going on? I don't have time for your stupid fire blackouts, Pearl. Just help me kill these guys. Krieg was seething by now. One by one his advantages were slowly being stripped away, but he had a few left. He picked up his discarded shoulder pad, stake launcher and refitted another poison gas canister to the gun. The can looked a little stressed from his time in the void but was otherwise undamaged. He re-aimed it at the Bharati and screamed at the top of his lungs. If you so much as move, I'll kill every last F and carrot king blackguard on that ship. He used his other hand to jab his thumb in their direction for Pearl, who took a few seconds to determine what he was supposed to do. He hopped back into the water and over to Sanji and Luffy, once again towering over the two. The cooks were both horrified and fed up. Who uses the same tactic twice in a row? And if you even try to use that smoke $T, then Jin is gonna blow a hole through your beloved master's head. Luffy looked at him. Calm eyes met angry ones, both scanning each other, searching the other's very essence for the answer to one question. Would they really go through with it? And what both of the fighters found in a stunning realization, that the answer was yes. Krieg stared at him for a second before turning to face the Bharati. Fine. I can always get more crewmen. Jin, blow Zeph's head off. Mere days before, Demon Crusher, Jin would not have hesitated to do whatever his master said at a moment's notice. Men, women, children, he'd killed them all at a snap of Krieg's fingers. Feelings of guilt or remorse were foreign concepts to the old Jin, for no one had ever given him the same courtesy a single day in his life. Now though he wasn't even sure if he could as much as kill a fish, and damned if he didn't hate that. Do it now, Jin. Wormhole. In an instant the straw-hatted boy and his soon-to-be cook were back on the ship, unintentionally dragging along Pearl, who had grabbed Luffy by the shirt before he telephoned. Pearl. Getting over his confusion far quicker than most, Pearl charged the two along the narrow deck, shields banging together loudly. Sanji and Luffy braced for impact. KLACK, *, the Pearl bell rang out one last time, then imploded. The indestructible shield that Pearl was so proud of was smashed into 100 tiny pieces, crumbling like some sort of delicious baked treat that had been left in a glass of milk. The force of the attack that had destroyed it tore through Pearl's blubbery torso and along his slim by comparison limbs, damaging every last part of him in one precision blow. He collapsed to his knees, staring back at the traitor who did this to him. "Sorry, Pearl. But if anyone's killing Sanji, it's me," Jin said calmly, twirling the tonfa-handled melon hammers with practiced skill. He turned back to Sanji just as Pearl collapsed, the hammer ends now resting on his elbows while he took a stance. "You saved us, Sanji. I owe you for that. I had hoped that you'd have the sense to leave when you had the chance like the guests." He unshouldered his tonfa, whirling them about so the hammer ends pointed at his savior. He smiled, "But since you didn't, the least I could do is kill you myself." Sanji nodded and uttered an unconvincing thanks. He craned his neck over to Patty, "Release the fins." Patty, who hadn't said anything in a while, blinked before the request filtered into his brain. He ran inside the Barati, which seconds later started to shake and expand. On either side of the massive fish fins sprouted large wooden platforms the size of a local theater stage, bigger than a high school stage but not as big as a Broadway stage. "What the?" gasped Jin. As if this boat wasn't weird enough looking, he looked back at his soon-to-be opponent for an explanation. Sanji shrugged. Customers got sick of his fighting inside, so he had these built. He walked out onto the extended deck, motioning for Jin to follow. Everyone was locked onto the two, including Krieg, who, while refusing to let his guard down, always enjoyed watching his second demolish people. "Make it quick, Jin. I'm getting very impatient." Jin was Krieg's biggest fan, so he obeyed without hesitation. He charged Sanji, driving one of his hammers into the fin hard enough to smash through it, and just as quickly pushed up, sending splintered wood hurtling at the cook. It was easily enough dodged by him but was immediately greeted by a surprise swipe to his neck by the tonfa, pulling him to hit the floor hard. The sound of wind whipping filled his ears from Jin twirling his other weapon while sitting next to him. "I was expecting a bigger challenge, Sanji. This didn't even make my top 40. He grinned in a manner that made his so-called hero seem tame. "Just kill me, you ungrateful ass." The hammer swung down. Sanji's leg swung up. Jin's head swung left along with the rest of him. The cook didn't give him time to breathe. Still in a handstand, his two legs blur at Jin, scoring 2 blows to his chest and already weak stomach, sending him spinning. Jin reacted by catching himself in mid-spin and lashing out. A loud crack was heard when he got Sanji square in the back. At the same time, the cook scored a third hit across the jaw. Groaning, both got back up. Jin licked the blood on his lips and grinned. Now this was a fight. Sanji thought otherwise. If you're first mate, then the crew must be a joke. His opponent nodded. "I agree, but you can't be doing much better if you're down to insults." Sanji didn't reply. "Well, he did, but you can hardly call the funny creaking noises and loud popping sounds a reply. Looks like all I need is one more hit to put you down, die Sanji." Once more, in a manner that gets very boring to repeat over and over and over and over and over again, he charged the man who saved his life. Swiping at Sanji, you effortlessly cartwheeled out of the way far too easily. A little too easily for his liking. He missed on purpose. He didn't really care to think as to why Jin would miss. If he did, he would have realized that as battered as both men were from their fights, both of them were on their last legs. Not only that, but their own actions only helped to aggravate their conditions, like a runner competing in a race with a bad ankle or a gymnast with a gangrenous arm. Each strike they aimed did just as much damage as each one they took. If he knew all that, then he would have stopped himself from delivering the mother of all knee drops into the hardwood deck. He literally exploded in pain. Veins ruptured and muscles tore in a dozen different places, and of course there was the oh-so-predictable coughing up blood. Jin walked over to him, casually nudging him, making the cook fall onto his back, gasping. Jin put one knee on his sternum and held his neck in his hand, his tonfa over his head. "I win, Sanji," he said, not at all sounding triumphant. "Ha ha ha. Yes, Jin. Kill him. Turn his head to paste, now." Jin complied, clenching the handle of his weapon tightly, but avoiding Sanji's horrified look as he realized his dream was done for. "Stop hesitating. Kill him. What was wrong?" He'd never felt this way before. All those people he'd killed in the past, he did it without hesitation. staring into their terrified eyes as he did so. So why couldn't he lower his tonfa now? Why couldn't he met this mont's eyes? He'd splattered kids' heads open like melons and smiled about it. But the one who kicked his ass was the one that got his conscience going. Because he saved your Elrig was his idol. His hero, everything he'd ever done was for this great man to achieve his grand dream. That great man, who killed off more of his own crew than any enemy ever has just for questioning him. That didn't matter. He owed Krieg for everything. Such as power, respect, fame, power you had long before Krieg recruited you. The fear of your crew is not respect. Fame? You mean that wanted poster that makes it impossible to met anyone but the S and low lives you've been surrounded by since? This man gave you food when others let you starve. He knew what you would do and still saved your life. Well, Jin? I said kill him, screamed the Armada leader, red in the face with rage. Kill him or I'll do it and take you along with him. No, Krieg blinked. He stuck his pinky in his ear and flicked out whatever was on it. What did you say? He said with deadly evenness. Jin stood up. Not breaking eye contact with the man gave his answer. I said I quit. He threw his tonfa down hard on the deck where they emitted a loud thunk. The Armada must have an amazing dental plan because the Don didn't even seem to care when his teeth started cracking from gritting them so hard. Jin, do you have any idea WHO you're talking to? I am Don Krieg, captain of what? The former first mate bit back. In case you didn't notice, Don Krieg, your entire 5,000 strong, no, your 5,000 weak crew is gone. Your only surviving member is bleeding at my feet. Those 50 ships you're so proud of are at the bottom of the sea. You're captain of nothing. Wrong. Dead. Wrong. The shield gun trembled in the imposing mont's grip. The canister attached to the barrel aiming dead center for the three who dared defy him. I am Don Krieg. He wanted nothing more than to drop the thing and grip his head to ease the headache that was building but didn't. Blood poured from his head from wounds that opened up from the blood racing through his veins. I am the most powerful man in the entire East Blue. I can easily get more men. I can get 100, 1,000 ship if I pleased. I am the man who will conquer the Grand Line. I will be Pirate King. But you, Jin, your story ends here along with these brats. He sneered and pulled the trigger. The poison gas bomb, the MH5 rocketed towards them. The Bharati cook running as far away from what they were sure would be a devastating explosion. Jin grabbed onto Sanji and Luffy to jump into the water only to find himself wrenching his shoulder and being pulled backwards by the youngest boy. Luffy didn't know what was in that grenade and honestly, do you really think he would care? Like all D's, he rushed into danger and only worried about consequences when he was dead. He tore from Jin's grip and flung his fist out. A wall of darkness speeding out towards the deadly bomb. The former Don snarled. No you don't. He ripped off a stake from the useless reel and flung it with pinpoint accuracy at the MH5. Boom! The canister exploded in a massive purple cloud, sending its fatal toxins in every direction. Well, every direction the powers of the Yami no I didn't catch it first. The fatal smoke was almost completely devoured by the boy save for a few wisps which still managed float on the winds around the dark and into his lungs. He fell to his knees almost instantly, hacking and coughing up life fluid. Luffy, Sanji was at the boy's side with Jin hovering over the two with a not happy look. This ain't good. That gas is special made to deal with a lot of people at once. Even a single breath can kill a man, an ordinary man, in a few seconds. Hack, then it's a good thing we's I'm not ordinary. The boy who wasn't lucky enough to be impelled down's chief warden at the moment managed to sputter out, groaning as he managed to push himself to his feet and stand as steadily as a drunkard. This kid is harder to kill than a roach. Damn him for making me do this. With the flick of a switch his gun retracted and became a shield again. Grabbing the other one of his shoulder he cupped the two together. A pole that didn't have any signs of being collapsible shot out from the bottom at the same time a short but razor-sharp blade sprang from the top. He clutched the pole and swept his new toy out in front of him. Let's see you stop this when you can barely stand. He took 2 steps before literally launching himself at the trio. Oddly shaped spear swinging down on them looking like it would crush them then slash. Luffy, who still felt like his brain was being soaked in rum, raised his hand to catch the weapon, but found himself being pushed to the side with his new cook by a very worried Jin. Boom! He didn't fling them far enough before they were all caught in a massive explosion, the shock wave of the blast flinging them from their positions crashing into the side of Baratie, while Luffy, who had broken away from the two, hit the guardrails before peeling off into the sea. Luffy, Sanji pulled himself free and dived for the boy before he sank under the sea, tugging him from the drink and up onto the fin again. Or rather what was left of it, since Krieg's explosive stunt had demolished almost all of it. Sitting out a mouthful of seawater, Luffy spoke, completely forgetting to thank Sanji for saving his life. What the heck was that? Sanji, though panting heavily, still managed to shrug. Dunno. Maybe those shields were full of dynamite? Really? Awesome. I want one. Adrenaline pumping through his veins in sheer excitement as he drooled over the idea of swinging an exploding spear. No, an axe. A big double-bladed axe twice as wide as him and just as long. Giant bomb axe. Yeah, 10. Close. Jin explained while cradling a now useless arm. He had it made in North Blue by some brainiacs. Not even he knows how it works, but it lets loose an explosion every time it hits something without any explosives at all. And the harder he swings, the bigger the boom. Sanji mm'd, so we just have to Avenue. I want it. Before two words could be strung together, the youngest of the three surged forward, hopping over the new wreckage with feline grace, heading right for his opponent with arms outstretched like a child rushing to grab for the present his father was holding. Krieg was only too happy to oblige. He hefted his spear up and brought it crashing back down on Luffy's head. Boom! Krieg dodged back, realizing that detonating the ground beneath you may not have been all that smart. He landed back on the ship and surveyed his handiwork. Aside from the cook and the traitor, that pest had finally been killed. Not even a bubble floated to the surface. He hoisted his giant lollipop onto his shoulder and grinned, hiding the fact that he was exhausted beyond belief. Who'd have thought such a rookie could give me that much of a workout? Ah well, Something was wrong. He felt off somehow. He did have quite a few injuries, but he'd already compensated for them. Somewhat woozy from blood loss, but he'd be lying if he said he'd had worth. He checked his gauntlets, seeing if they were loose. The right one was fine, so he shifted his spear to it so he could check his left. Wait, was it supposed to be this heavy? He looked up the length and let out a strangled sound of shock. No way. The boy, the hairless chattering monkey, was holding onto his mighty battle spear like a barnacle despite only just being poisoned. His legs twisted around the pole and his hands grasping at the shields. Can I have this? He said eagerly, his eyes shining like stars at the thought of having such a cool weapon. Let go. He started swinging it about madly, trying to get Luffy away from him. He went to smash the body against the deck again when he stopped. The boat he had taken refuge on would be no good if he destroyed it. I just want the cool part. You can keep the pole. He heaved on the cupped shields and with one mighty twist snapped the bomb blade in half a foot of wood off the end of the now pole arm, rendering it useless and Krieg speechless. My spear. Do you have the slightest idea how Malaj to get the money for that? The Don screamed at Luffy, who was too busy admiring his latest acquisition to listen to the raging man. So cool. He examined the weapon with admiring eyes. A little alteration to the Jolly Roger and a bladed edge, and say hello to Luffy's new weapon. Give me that. Hey Sanji, catch. He tossed it over his shoulder towards the cook, who in a moment of confusion actually found himself raising his hands and catching the disc. He stared down at it for a few seconds, examining it closely before looking at Jin, who had dived back into the sea. After a few more moments his brain caught up with him and he fumbled with it, letting it drop onto the deck while he joined Jin, just as the weapon made contact with the wood. Bang! The force from the insignificant fall only supplied enough power to make it jump a few inches in the air and fall back to earth, the former fin beneath it barely scorched. Krieg stared at his pride and joy. Useless for the remainder of the fight. He only had one option left. He hated only having one option. He sighed deeply and cracked his armored knuckles. Fine. You want a brawl? I'll give you a brawl. And this time I'll make sure you won't have time to use your powers. Luffy stared back over to Zeph with hopeful eyes, only to have the older man shake his head. Luffy, he sighed in irritation, then turned back to his enemy grinning, also popping his finger joints. I can't go all out, but that doesn't mean I haven't been going easy on you as well. Krieg cocked an eyebrow. Easy. The Yami boy's smile became a little cocky. paper-thin tendril of blackness creeped out over him, clinging tighter to his skin than spandex. Yami Yami release. The wriggling darkness evaporated in an instant, but not a soul or a sliver that he had absorbed recently appeared like they normally would from that command. The only indication that something had happened was the future Pirate King's ever-growing smile. "Why are you grinning?" Krieg demanded while he jumped towards his enemy. Making one final leap towards Luffy's own perch with one invincible fist pulled back. Luffy didn't answer. He just vanished. No one, Krieg, Sanji, Jin or the now-returned cooks had any idea where he went. They didn't have time to, since he almost immediately reappeared in front of the pirate captain. Fist already buried in a now mush-like stomach. Faster than anyone could completely follow, he kicked him in the stomach and pushed off so he would not fall into the dreaded water like the older man. While his staff were in awe at what just happened, Zeph was only impressed. That's damn impressive speed. The pirate leader pulled himself onto Luffy's platform, standing up and towering over him, idly noting that the punch didn't hurt anywhere near as much as the last ones did. His brow twitching like crazy while the boy just kept smiling and holding up his arms like a boxer, jabbing at the air faster than he could follow. "I don't know what you did, but a weak little punch like that won't stop me." He slammed his fist down on where Luffy had been standing, just in time to feel a foot crash into the side of his head and then another on top. Krieg made to swing for him only to get a knee to the middle of his back. Luffy danced around the massive man, scoring countless blows that, although quick, weren't nearly as powerful as before. Though he was still doing better than Krieg, who had yet to even touch him. "You like it?" he said while jabbing Crayoe under the chin. "I control gravity," blew his knees out from under him. "By making my own gravity stronger, I can hit harder than anyone. Pearl symbols without the symbols. And it's double good training for my muscles. So when I turn it off, I'm a super speedster." A blur of motion and he was back in front of the downed Armada leader. "But I like being heavier better. It stopped people from pulling me away from the dinner table, and it lets me take guys out with one good punch." He brought his hands together again. "Yami Yami waits." Darkness bubbled around him once more, creeping over him like ivy, especially around his arms and legs, before seeming to fade back into him like one of those old fading transition scenes, leaving only the faintest markings on him that looked more like a slight tan. The wood underneath him cracked under the weight that suddenly appeared on it. He grabbed onto Krieg's hair and pulled his head back. The man unable to pull back as it felt like he had a 2-ton weight braided in his scalp. "You can't do this to me. I'm Don Krieg, King of the East Blue." His right fist shot at Luffy's chest, ready to cave it in, only to have it caught easily. He cried out in pain when the boy closed his grip, buckling his hands inside the metal, and the diamond started crushing his bones. "Big deal. I'm gonna be king of the whole damn world." He threw Krieg's shattered fist to one side and pulled his own back, the tan markings growing darker and thicker around his fingers until it was solid black. Yami waits times 50. Eclipse punch. The fist connected with Don Krieg's jaw. Asterisk. I use way too many sound effects. Oh, and wadoom. Krieg's jaw split in half under the strain of the tremendous blow right before it shot skyward, pulling the rest of him along with it. He flew off like a rocket, tearing through Barati's main sail without losing momentum until he was little more than a twinkling speck in the distance. Luffy stared after the dot. Looking around, he saw everyone else was doing the same. "That was some fight," he said cheerfully, right before collapsing on the spot. "What? You thought I was just gonna forget he was poisoned? You sure you want me coming along with you guys? Do you think you could get him to let you leave now, even if you wanted?" After punching the fallen pirate into the horizon, it was pretty clear to Zeph and the rest of his crew that the chore boy had definitely earned his freedom. They'd been planning to let him go anyway. The way he was in the kitchen, they'd all be dead in a week, and Zeph really didn't want to give him time to take up the other part of the agreement. Sanji originally hadn't wanted to come. Scratch that, he was ready to kick out the teeth of everyone who came near him. In the end, though, it had taken the combined efforts of the cooks to convince the boy to go and follow his dream instead of living for his masters. After he joined the Straw Hats, Jin followed immediately, which was a big help considering all the other crew members he'd acquired weren't really listening to him. "You all ready to chase after Nami, Jin? Are you maggots ready to chase after your captain's navigator?" "Yes, Battle Commander Jin," the remaining former Krieg pirates cried out. "I can't hear you," Yes, Battle Commander Jin, sir. The sickly-looking man smiled and turned back to his new captain. Yeah, they're ready, all right. Luffy nodded and looked out over the boat that along with two others some careless but apparently very well-off customers had abandoned in the confusion. I don't know why you left Nami, but I won't have anyone else for my navigator. She looked out over the expansive sea. A tiny pimple of a landmass blemishing the otherwise unspoiled view, but to Nami the island was the most beautiful thing in the world. She sighed dreamily. I'm home. A boat sailed through the calm belt, moving ever forward despite the lack of wind and totally uninterrupted by its denizens. The lone man sailing in this boat sat quietly, running a thumb over the bleeding wound on his cheek. 11. I definitely look forward to hearing more about your crew, Roronoa Zoro. End chapter. Omake Mahawk walked down the corridors of his spacious and drafty castle. The human drills screeching could be heard from the remains of the town below as they dealt with the latest intruder to their home. He pushed against massive double doors to enter the room that was his destination, closing them behind him tightly so he would not be disturbed by those who aren't there. Scanning his bedroom wing eyes, he searched for even the slightest hint that someone else was there. Finding nothing, he breathed deeply in relief. Removing his coat, he hung it up on an old dresser mannequin he'd found elsewhere in the castle, his hat following close behind. His sword was removed from his back and placed on hooks upon his wall before he walked over to the dresser and sat down. His eyes shifted from right to left. It still felt like he was being watched. Yet if he couldn't see it, then it wasn't there. He pulled his eyelids wide with one hand, then used the other to grasp at his eyeball, pulling a clear disc away. GFH. His head snapped around towards the source of the noise, an empty corner of his room. He stared at it for 7 seconds before turning back and removing his other contact lens, placing the 2 yellow pieces of glass in a bowl of solution for the next day. And no one will ever know but me, he said to himself. Isn't that right, Absalom? The invisible animal-faced man threw the doors open and ran down the halls as fast as he could. The world's greatest swordsman closed behind him. He'd be going back to Moria empty-handed, and to Hogback for a few necessary replacements.